impromptu marching band that we've put together, even though we don't really have a marching band at MHS. So there will be like hundreds of kids through downtown Montpelier, so it'll surely be a sight.
At 6 o'clock.
Yes, it's at 6 on Wednesday. And then Thursday and Friday is the festival, which is taking place at U32. And I know some people here are hosting, so with that.
Did you say there's going to be a marching band parade in Montpelier on Wednesday?
Yes. And
At 6 o'clock.
it's
6 p.m.
yeah, it starts at the middle school. I will be in it. Solon Samba.
How many of you think there'll be?
My daughter will be in it too.
How many?
Ella will also, she's like playing with this huge drum that is like half the size of her. It's just, it'll be interesting to see. So 6 Wednesday.
Do you have any baton twirlers or
1,100
anything?
is the number of students expected.
What's that?
1,100.
Oh, really?
I didn't know that.
Just from Montpelier. Just kidding. How many of our folks? How many of ours?
That's why they were having a little difficult
Yeah.
bid.
We got them all? They're not all in?
No, 20?
You got 20 maybe?
How
From
many
Montpelier?
kids in Solon Samba?
I'd say like 20, 25.
Cool.
Yeah, it's interesting.
To add to that, there's gonna be buses parking at Moulton School, so they'll be at Main Street as well, so just if you're trying to get through town,
Don't.
navigate if you're not coming to the parade, which hopefully you all are, but there will be some traffic congestion with all the buses coming in.
Yeah, if you're trying to get through town, you won't. essentially. And this past week was prom, and I just wanted to give a huge shout out to the prom committee because I know they worked really hard to plan this, and I had a great time. And Emma also went, and I know she had a great time. And girls Ultimate played their first game a few days ago, and this weekend, Ultimate is hosting the Capital City Classic, which is this huge MHS tournament. And Club Action and Interact are banding together to organize the Empower Vermont Festival. And it was something that Emma actually started last year, and it was the Livelihood Music Festival, and we renamed it Empower Vermont this year. And it's in the works, but a lot of different club members, underclassmen and upperclassmen, are working to plan essentially a music festival that will also serve as a fundraiser and benefit a Washington County-based organization to help survivors of sexual assault. And that's partially why we decided to rename it, just because we really like the idea of empowering others and that being our new name. And yesterday, Mike News came to the Montpelier High School campus, and they're online, and so they're like a national news organization, and so they came for the second time, which is kind of phenomenal. And last time they had come because we raised the Black Lives Matter flag, and this time they were coming to interview youth lobby members and members of Montpelier High School Earth Group. And I was one of the students interviewed, and so was Mr. Sabo, Tom Sabo's son, Matt Sabo, and he goes to U32, and it was great to talk about the sense of community that I feel in Montpelier, and also how I've been able to, grow as an activist and advocate and find support for my school community in doing so, and the work that we've done as students in the State House. And it's also just hilarious, being on camera and having to walk around the building with Max Sabo pretending that he goes here. It was just when it comes out, it'll definitely be funny to the people who actually go here and work here. And AP exams, SBACs, and science assessments. I know that even though I technically have a late start, since I'm taking AP courses, while the freshmen are going to be doing their standardized tests and some students have a late start, I know that AP students in AP Bio and APUSH on Thursday and Friday will be coming in at regular time and doing some practice sessions. And I took science assessments last week, and I am taking some AP exams, and so I know that essentially all through the grades we're kind of experiencing standardized tests, and so we can answer questions if you do have any about what that is like. And as for student concerns and student needs, it's essentially just remain the same in terms of students' educational support systems and how best we can promote equity. And I know that you all were just meeting in regards to that, so I'd love to hear about any updates you might have, and just how we can support diversity and inclusion in the MRPS education. And I think also, in light of some recent events and just like a culture that I've noticed in some social groups at my school, just how we can go about changing that. And I think it ties into the work that we've done with restorative practices and what we're trying to implement in the MHS community. And it's a multi-year process, because with restorative practices you want to implement them right and make a good first impression so that students and community members don't really become resistant to it. And so we're really thinking this out well, and it's a student and faculty staff coalition that's working on restorative practices at MHS, and I'm part of it. And we met yesterday with Lou Ciceri, and he works in the planning room, and Lisa and Amanda Payne and guidance, and talked a little bit about small changes we can make right now and how that'll fit into the bigger picture of what we can do to foster community. And restorative practices is not just a restorative justice piece. It's not about what happens when something goes wrong. It's also just about how we can foster community and a sense of trust between teachers and students, even though teachers are authority figures, and how we can go about that. That's it. So I'd be happy to take some questions if you have any. Hear about the meeting you guys just had.
We fixed it all, don't worry.
Questions for?
As always, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, especially on a busy week. Appreciate it. Good luck.
Do you feel optimistic about the restorative justice process helping with the current situation?
I think so. I think that it's kind of the only solution I think that the problems that I and other students have noticed are a product of just a negative culture amongst peers, and I think that restorative practices and restorative justice is perhaps the only, or at least the most effective way to sufficiently solve the problem of that negative culture and change it so that it's less toxic, I guess. And that is kind of the only solution I see there right now for the best.
How is the overall culture in the high school changed during the standardized testing periods? Does it get intense? Does it get grumpy? Is it none of the above? Is it not a big deal?
I wouldn't say overall it's anything. You might hear some cynical comments about standardized tests from students, but I think that's essentially as bad as it gets, and overall the school culture doesn't change in response to standardized tests. And I know that for juniors perhaps it's a little bit different, just because we pay a lot of money to take AP exams, and then we have to deal with the stress of taking them, and they're like one each week depending on how many AP exams you're taking. So, but we're all in this together kind of thing. So
You have to pay for the APs? Oh, yeah.
There-
College
it
board,
depends.
It's like,
Yeah,
94 perhaps.
you pay 94 per AP exam you take.
Add it to the list, Bridget.
It's pretty difficult to get a fee waiver for it too, so it's like 94 per exam you take.
But you could take the AP course and not take the test.
not necessarily,
Can you?
it depends. I know, my daughter has one where she has to take the course as part of she has to take the test as part of the course.
Like her grade is dependent on it, kind of thing, on the test result?
Yeah. The course would be incomplete, I guess, if she.
Yeah. I wonder if
That's the teacher decision.
is there a subsidy stream somehow if folks need it for the AP test? Any idea?
Right?
Yeah, am I talking next?
Maybe.
You're talking right now.
Yeah.
Well, you're talking now.
Yeah, no, somebody said put it on the equity list. I put it on the equity list. I think when need has been expressed, we've problem solved it ad hoc. But I think we just were talking about this recently, the guidance counselors and myself, around, you know, how can we take this financial hurdle and burden out of the situation. College Board provides free testing for students based on income levels for the SAT and the PSAT, but they don't for AP. And so it's a problem.
In
So-
my old district at MVU, which had a much higher percentage of kids on free and reduced lunch, we used Title IV dollars when that came out. We wrote an investment to cover AP exams and SAT, PSAT, and we made PSAT a whole school expectation that we did during school, so that kids could see that there's a possibility, you know, just not choose not to take it. So we made some very intentional moves in that manner that are possible to do here as well.
So PSAT is not something that's done in our schools right now.
Yeah.
It's done, but
It
it's a
is.
student choice.
It's a student choice.
It's not.
But it's not, but if the student elects to take the PSAT, does the student have to pay the fee for the PSAT?
Unless they
Depending on
qualify for a voucher based on income.
Do you have any idea what percentage of kids get the PSAT?
I don't know the exact percentage off the top of my head, but it's high.
What's the fee?
They probably remember, because I haven't been a guidance counselor in 6 years.
Here does it almost
It used to be
know
like
which
$30.
I think it's 25, but I think you pay the fee when you're I don't know if you pay it both sophomore and junior year. Maybe it's just when you take it as a sophomore. I'm not sure. I mean,
If you take it as a 10th grader,
mhm.
You can't qualify for the College
Oh,
Board's
okay.
waiver, but because that's early.
Mhm.
If you take it as a junior, at the beginning of your junior year, then you can qualify for the waiver and not pay for it. And I think for the last 2 years, we just paid for them all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
This is a Googleable answer.
Yep.
So the PSAT registration fee for 2018-19 is $16.
And what's the AP fee, is it similar?
It's like $100
No,
a
it's
test.
more.
That's
94 per
high.
AP, and that's,
High.
it's also unfortunate that that's the one that isn't, like, that most expensive ones aren't the ones that are covered. I think you can get a fee waiver for AP exams, but I think that it's definitely, there's like a stricter, I don't know, vetting process in determining that, and your income level has to be like substantially low, and they can't, yeah, there isn't really flexibility in the AP exam fee waiver
Yeah.
process.
I mean, there's all sorts of equity issues there, in
Yeah.
terms of people who would access it, and also, you know, if that's a money issue, it's kind of like money issues becoming money issues, but that's a money issue, if it's mandatory, then I guess you can not take the test because you can't cover it. If it's not mandatory, I can see someone skipping the test because they don't have the $94, which
Right.
means that they don't get the AP credit.
They
which
lose
means
the
that
benefit.
But they lose the benefit of not having to
Some
take
of
that
the
college
benefit,
course,
yeah.
which can be expensive. So,
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
yeah.
It's a good thing to put on the list to discuss.
Yes. Great. Thanks, Hope. We appreciate it.
We didn't really answer Hope's question. Hope asked about our discussion about equity. Do you want to sum it
We've
up?
just begun.
Sure.
Is the answer to that question. We've just
We
begun.
talked about really, like, we're getting to true equity when we redistribute resources into groups that have historically been marginalized. And that can be very hard. And how do we uncover where we do that?
I would say even beyond resources, I mean, also things like narratives and power and perspective and decision making. And, because I think in some ways you can perpetuate inequity by just distributing resources, but keeping all the power structures in place that make it hard for the person to say we sprinkle some stuff over there. So,
It was a very good discussion.
really want to continue it. And the one thing we came out of it is that we want to be more intentional about thinking about equity in everything we do, rather than having it be like an occasional silo discussion. That's,
And the AP courses do come.
yes.
That's good.
Mhm.
That is good.
Okay, anything else for Hope? Thank you.
Ghosted.
Yeah.
Vivian, good luck on the test.
Take it easy, folks.
Yeah. Remember what I always tell you too, don't forget to have fun.
So a couple things, we have, one, parental request from John Guthrie, who's on the agenda. Sarah came in after public comment. She did reach out to Libby and I earlier and say that she had something she wanted to say, so I'm gonna make the rare move of opening up public comment again, because Sarah did say that she had something she wanted to say, and
Thank you.
couldn't quite make it
Baby
on time,
became
so.
sick from daycare, so whole afternoon got changed. But I'm good.
Yes, yes.
Awesome.
And you can sit or stand, whichever is possible.
Awesome. Because I'm way too short. So, thank you again for letting me submit public comment and for listening to my emails. I wanted to have a discussion or just kind of relay my thoughts around the facilities primarily at Main Street Middle School. The impact that that has on culture and learning, and at least express my hope and desire for the board to really think about that building and how that presents learning as a whole to our community, but also what service it's providing for the middle school. So my son is in 5th grade. He is, he's moved from UES, which I think is a historic but beautiful school. I've come now to Montpelier High School several times to sit before you guys. And I think this too is a beautiful school, and that's not the feeling that I get when I walk into Main Street Middle School. There's a lot of concrete, there's not a lot of light, there's a lot of disrepair. If you go down into the cafeteria, it certainly isn't a place for mingling or socialization. It's very cramped and tight. And I see that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to that building, and I think that work isn't being done. And I understand that you guys have capital funds and you make repairs, but to me, that's more of a repair and is in need of a complete overhaul. In so much as, you know, you're really gonna have to start planning on how you wanna either revitalize that building or are you going to relocate that school. And I recognize that that is not something that will happen in my 5th grader's lifetime, but I also have a nearly 2-year-old and hope it's something that by the time he's transitioning to Main Street Middle School, it's something that is being talked about or hopefully has been achieved. I would recognize that in addition to that environment as a parent walking in, the impact of that on the learning environment, I've read a lot of research around how the learning environment is affected in the sense of where kids behaviorally fall, the way that behavior is perceived. I don't know how many of you have been to Main Street Middle School, I'm assuming all of you. If you walk on that playground, there's like a basketball court where all the concrete is cracked, so the kids can't actually play basketball because they think everyone's cheating, because the basketball literally pops in the wrong direction. There's a couple 4-square places. There's what Owen calls like a tent-like structure in the middle where there's a table but there's no chairs.
The gazebo.
The gazebo, thank you. And then there's some swings, and that's it. And we have kids who move from Union in 5th grade who still very much need to run around. And I know for myself, my son has had some definite behavioral issues this year, and a lot of those have taken place in snack recess and lunch recess. And when I talked to him about it, I'm going, and then I went out to the playground to try and understand what he was talking about. And I'm like, well, no wonder this is going on. Like, what is there for you to do? What is there that's positive here? it's no wonder that there's so much social behavioral interaction going on where he's so consumed with what everyone else is doing, because really what they do at lunch recess is talk. They're not interacting, playing soccer. So he said, you know, at Union, his favorite thing to do is play soccer with the goals, and they don't have that opportunity there. He did mention that there's the field in the back that largely is covered in snow and these different type things. So I think overall, I just wanted to say, I feel like this is something that the board really needs to address. It's a long-term planning issue, but it's something that I hadn't heard previously in my meetings that I'd been here and the engagement that I'd had with the school. I also think there are things that we could do in the meantime to mitigate some of those issues. Even, I mean, you can add fresh coats of pastel paint, and they show that that has a positive impact on behavior. Whether or not you choose to do that is up to you, but I think that there are things we can do to have that impact. And I know in my discussions with Pam and Matt around behavior and this culture at Union, there's definitely, my understanding is that I'm not alone as a parent in struggling with some of the behavioral aspects, but also just some of the frustrations at Union, and I don't speak for them.
You mean Main Street, sir?
Or, yeah, at Main Street. So I think it's important to recognize that, like, that building has a huge effect on how we present ourselves, how the learning environment is perceived, and what kind of environment they're leaving coming from Union, and then having that impact at Main Street. So I'm hoping it's something you're going to approach. My second topic would be the use of detention at Main Street Middle School and the national move towards restorative practice, the recognition of cognitive behavioral therapy, or like processing, so doing, if you have a behavioral incident, going through that with a student and then going through like what could you have done differently, how can we repair the harm. My son hasn't had a detention, but he comes home every day with a list of kids who have had detentions, even though I don't think that they're new kids every day. It seems to constantly be on his mind, and it's almost idolized in his mind of like, oh, this is something, you know, that's weird and maybe I should try and get this, or, oh, these are all the kids who did this today and this is what they did to get detention, and it's like this rumor mill that goes on, and I'm constantly surprised, one, by the fact that this is what consumes his social interactions, but two, by the fact that we're still using this practice in such a progressive community. I recognize that the board has very little say over that practice, but for whatever influence you do have, I would encourage you to look at the national standards and the policy movement towards that and move towards more restorative practices. And the last thing I want to address, which I've talked to Libby about, is my interaction in Main Street, where I feel like there's a lot of just culturally, there's been a ginormous shift between Union and Main Street. And I haven't been able to completely put my finger on it, but the kids are quite frankly just mean. And the things that my son comes home with, and he doesn't want to go to school, and he doesn't find school to be a positive environment. And we just spent nearly 2 weeks in England, and he was a different kid when we were gone. And I just checked in with his special educator today, and she's like, he's right back at it. He doesn't want to be here. He doesn't want to interact. And when I ask him about it, it's all about the social and behavioral interactions and the lack of support that he's feeling in this environment. And I've talked a lot with Matt about this, and I really value all the things that he's doing and all the work that he's trying to achieve. And I think that there are steps that are being made. But when I talk about it with Owen and I talk about it with other parents, I'm not looking at it as a singular, as a parent who's seeing a singular issue with my son, but I'm seeing it as a systemic issue. And there's just, you know, we're recognizing as society, we're moving on, and we're going through this great evolution of change. And there's a lot of meanness going on, and a lot of bullying, and a lot of kids are just not nice there. And I think that's something that really needs to be addressed. And I think some of that could be addressed by things like changing detention to restorative practices, incorporating things like, you know, circles of support and accountability. So that's what I came to say. I really welcome all of the hopeful insight you might have in that issue, and I hope you guys take some of those things into consideration in your next policy moves and capital funding. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, and we do have, facilities is a subject that we're planning to discuss as part of our retreat, and clearly MSMS is a huge need on that. And I definitely want to echo your sentiments about restorative practice and detention. They're at odds, and it's surprising we still have that practice in the district, so thank you.
I think you can do a lot with really small changes too. So, thank you all. It's been unfortunate for you to go back to my signature.
Yeah, good luck, sorry. Thanks, Sarah. So next on the agenda is John Guffray, who has a request to the board. Do you want to come up and kind of speak for a couple minutes? We can do it any way you want to, but I'm happy to give you the floor.
You can do it the easy way or the hard way, go.
And everyone did get your letter. So.
Okay. I won't fault any of you if you didn't go through the exhaustive length of it. Can't usually be faulted for not being thorough.
It was thorough.
So I guess what I'd like to do is ask the board, and I appreciate you having me here, to consider my request for you to reevaluate the policy mentioned there. I don't know, I did put some speculation as my guess was that was one of the easy merger policies because they were the same date, and it was probably just, let's move on to more important things. However, I think that it might have, at least in our situation, it seems like it's raised a potential question, certainly a question in our mind about is this policy good as it is, or or is there a better way, perhaps, to do that? So I don't want to go through all 5 pages of it. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I guess I want to make sure that the board understands where I'm coming from in my request, and I certainly have thought through it and on a variety of different levels. And would like to provide my feedback as well as some other insight, I guess, into it. I did try to find out from the Department of Education if they track how many school systems use September 1st. For those of you that don't know, the state mandates that you be 5 by before January 1st, so December 31st. And that you're in between, basically the dates are September 1st to December 31st. And then it's up to the districts to figure out what they want to do. So I got an answer from the Department of Ed. They do not track that information. So unfortunately, I don't have that. However, in searching for that, I was trying to find it online. I did come across an article, I think it was on Vermont Grow Kids, or I should have brought the website with me, but there are several, it was back in 2015, so a few years ago, it was written, and it mentions, basically it was an article about when to start kindergarten, and talks about the goods, the bads, the research saying holding kids back is good, the research saying advancing kids early is good. There seem to be, at least in this article, 3 districts that were mentioned that have different ways of dealing with this. So what I'm asking for you guys to consider isn't abnormal, and it's not certainly an aberration. Burlington does have, a particularly large district, has an appeal process. It appears that Richmond has one because they're mentioned in here. With a parent who appealed to have their child enter kindergarten early. And Winooski, apparently, at least at this time, was using the December 31st date, and mentions a kid whose birthday was at that point, and it worked out great. And then it also mentioned lots of kids whose parents held them back and entered kindergarten at age 6. And I guess what I gleaned from this is that there is no correct answer. There's no definitive data on it. And that it's really on a case-by-case basis. Now, as I mentioned in my letter to you, I've been in your seat denying one of these requests before. When I was the board chair at Roxbury, we had to do this, and The general consensus at the time was, we got a lot on our plate. We don't want to open up this can of worms, and the answer is no. And I think on further reflection now on the other side of that equation, that probably wasn't the best way to handle that. Not particularly proud of that moment on the board, but it is what it is, and I think that's certainly a reasonable answer to my request, is that we just don't want to get down this road. I guess I would encourage you to do that, and I think that my mention about making good policies, in my opinion, are based on objective data, but also have room to evaluate special circumstances, not on subjective means, but by objective means. So while we have objective data, which the state says January 1, we're choosing September 1, we have that as general guidelines amongst the education community. Being able to evaluate on special circumstances and requests using objective means, which would be employing testimony, say, from the parents, which is probably the least objective, but then employing the teacher, the current teacher, the future teacher, the principal, the superintendent, all the educational professionals who will do this screening anyways, but decide whether or not that child is ready or not ready. That's something that certainly some districts have chosen to do, but it's different than what we've got now. It's pretty cut and dry to say it's September 1 and we don't have to have any of these discussions, and I understand that, and I understand the board and a superintendent not wanting to go down that road. I don't think it will translate into a lot of requests. If we're I do mention the structural differences between Roxbury and Montpelier, which I think is significant in this case, not just from the size of the school, but the way the classes are structured there. It's a multi-grade classroom building. It's very different than what Montpelier has. We discussed some of these potential growing pains as we merged and figuring out how to manage the bigger picture within different school buildings that operate differently. We've had 3- and 4-year-old pre-K available 5 days a week for 5 years now at Roxbury, and that's not what Montpelier has or is used to. And I think that that's certainly worth considering and evaluating, simply because in the case of our son, he's missing the date of September 1st, but he has, in his case, been in structured daycare since he's been 3 months old, and he's been in a pre-K program. I would like to see him evaluated by the educational professionals in his life to see if he is ready to move, and I think that would be an appropriate way to evaluate the request, as opposed to just saying, well, John's making a good case, let's do it. That's not a good way to make policy. If I'm persuasive, it shouldn't be about what I'm saying. It should be about the teachers who are saying he's ready, and or he's not. Happy to. I'll keep dragging on, so you guys just chime in.
Yeah, so I think Michelle had her hand first.
Go ahead.
I just want to say that when I first started on the board, maybe, or early on, I thought that was a very reasonable approach, John. Why don't we just we got a request, and I said, why don't we just have the kindergarten teachers do the evaluation? Because they do that. The preschool kids come in the spring and they do a little assessment of some sort, and I said, they can tell us whether this child is ready for kindergarten. And the kindergarten teachers said, A, don't ever do that again. And B, if you ever do that again, we're gonna do the same thing, which is say, no, they're not ready. Because we think it should be September 1st.
I guess I'd ask why.
Their-
It's not an
their-
appropriate
their professional
response by an
judgment, I think.
educational professional saying, I don't want to do that.
No, it wasn't that they don't want to do it, they didn't think that it was good practice.
Steve?
John, I read your letter. I wouldn't read it as deeply as a short letter, probably. So I kind of went quick.
A little vertical.
Yeah, I went fast, and I understood most of it. There was the piece about the cohort thing, though, where, you know, in the multi-age classroom and how, you know, the rest would move on without him. Can you rephrase that again can you go over that fact pattern for me? Because I have to say I don't remember the details.
So one of our concerns, and this just has to do with the nature of being in a small building with 10 kids in a two-age classroom, is your cohorts can be very small, and we've had grades where there have been 1 kid and 0 kids in that school in the past. And in the case of his current pre-K class, all of his friends are a month or 2 or 3 or 4 older than him and are moving on to kindergarten.
All his friends or the entire?
No, not the entire group, but
Right.
the kids that he is interacting with on a daily, like linking up with socially and
His peers,
developmentally. And I've heard that there are some fairly young 3-year-olds coming into that class. And so I guess, given my son's particular situation, I'm advocating for the fact that, you know, his mother and I both feel that he just be kind of spinning his tires, hanging out with a bunch of young kids when the kids that he's basically developmentally at that level at are moving on to kindergarten. So is it going to hurt him one way or another? Probably not. We just feel that this is the best thing for him, and within the context of not asking for a special exception, that's why I was approaching it from, can we look at this policy? And does this policy suit our needs, or could it be done a little bit better? Yeah. So my concern is that he's going to be emotionally and developmentally ahead of the rest of his pre-K class if he stays there, because he's already done it, and that class will have to really sort of retreat into picking up for these young 3-year-olds. And the other component of that is managing, and this is where Ben and the teachers at that school could chime in on this, is managing those classrooms can sometimes be difficult, and we've had over the last few years there to have to really think about which age groups are going together based on the kids that are in the classroom, not necessarily just cut and dry on paper, we want a K1, a 1-2, or whatever. Sometimes it just changes because, and I think in fact they had some, you guys could correct me, Ryan and Lisa, on this. I think in the last year, while we were with WSSU, they had some of the kids out of like the kindergarten or the first grade doing part of the day with the class above because they were.
They split the first grade class
Yeah.
into 1, 2, or K1,
Yeah.
and they did it based on situations they won't do again. It wasn't based on best practice.
Yeah. So, it's not my specialty. I guess what I'm asking for is the evaluation of, based on that we have this situation now with a small building with small classes and multi-grades, and a situation where it might be appropriate to allow for this type of evaluation. And I mean, I get it, and I understand why they might not want to be put in that position, but you know, that might be best for them, but it might not be best for the kids. And ultimately, what we all do here is to create the best situation for the kids. And you guys may all disagree with me, and that's fine. I'm just making my case that I think that this is a reasonable thing, and other districts are doing it, and allowing kids to join in who are born in the end of December at that age. And the state has said that that's okay. So I guess that I'm asking for you guys to consider that.
Jim, what's our role in this?
Policy, right?
So the superintendent doesn't have any authority under our policy to make exceptions, is that?
Yes.
That's where we are, right? So, and really the board doesn't have authority to
Board
make
doesn't.
an exception either.
They
Only
would
to
have
rewrite policy.
We
Yeah.
have a policy, it's expressed for the policy.
So thinking about our conversation about equity and how the policy that we currently have versus a policy with more flexibility, which would be more equitable to all students. At first, I was thinking a more flexible policy because that's what I was thinking at first, but then I was thinking that the access to the process itself of a flexible policy has barriers for folks from marginalized groups. So I'd
Well-
be interested in exploring that more.
Good job applying our learning.
Man, I'm a good teacher.
So, I actually like our policy, and I have to admit, I have a bias towards not pushing younger kids into older cohorts, especially at their age. Because it's not just a question of is this child ready right now at 4 to go to kindergarten? It's a question of, we just heard about, the tough social environment in middle school. Is it that what would be a 9-year-old is ready to go to middle school? Is it a 17-year-old is ready to go to college? These kind of have like ripple effects through, through the whole education. And there's a lot of research out there that, people on the younger end, and the more you push it towards the younger end of the social spectrum, they might be ready academically, they might be precocious at 4 or 5, but socially there's usually challenges, and they usually catch up at some point. And I also think there's a fairness question. I mean, my daughter, even though it wasn't through pre-K, the way that Children's House was grouped, at least at that time, my daughter, who was a September birthday, was grouped with kids who all went to kindergarten before her. So she kind of had that year where, her peer group had moved on, there was a younger group that came in. It was a slightly awkward year, but now that she's like in 3rd grade, I'm definitely glad she's on the older side. I mean, there's like, I've seen the clear advantages of her being there. And I think it would be hard to create a flexible policy without just pushing it back to January 1st, because where does that flexibility come in play?
I'm curious if maybe Libby would be able to speak to what that objective guideline or test would look like. Michelle just shared her anecdotal story of the kindergarten teacher and saying, no, we don't want to do anything, because really like any flexibility would have to come back, like John had outlined, with a subjective test that all 4-year-olds will take this test. If they pass it, they're granted. If they don't pass it, well, another year of preschool.
We could do that easily for academics. We couldn't do it for social. Social emotional, there's nothing out there for that I know of.
And plus, you can't predict the longer term, as Jim mentioned, social repercussions.
In either direction.
So I want to be careful that the board doesn't act like child development experts. I think we all have our biases, but we don't necessarily know what's in the best interest of children. I know with my own child, I had the same issue where I wanted to advance her fast, and I was persuaded by a teacher to stop doing that. And I think that teacher was right for my kid, but that doesn't make that child right for John's kid. And if our teachers are really good at being able to assess objectively the academic piece of it, that's great. But I think parents can assess the social emotional piece very well. They may not be experts on that, and they may need some guidance on it, but I don't know that we want to put ourselves in the position to replace that. And obviously we should not be trying to make an exception to anything, and that this is a policy decision in terms of we would need to open up the policy, we would need to start the process of a rewrite based on research. We'd have to do all that stuff, right? And we need to be compelled, we'd have to have some evidence that that was something that we thought was worth doing. I think one thing I asked John was about the fact pattern around the cohorts, and what I was trying to get at, and I don't know that I got there, John, is that if there's something unique about the multi-age classroom that leaves the children coming out of that environment in a shocked kind of a system, or in an abandonment of their peer group somehow, some unique situation, then I think we might have a really compelling reason to open it up and say, you know what, the experience of Roxbury Elementary School kids is different than the experience of the Montpelier kids that we're used to. I'm not sure we got there. I don't know if we have that evidence. I think that there's kind of a circumstantial thing that occurred in your family situation that may not be universal or even close to universal there. There's an adjustment that...
The majority of Montpelier kids go to private preschools
and have the same sort of have the same exact experience. Yeah, I get that. That makes sense. So, yeah, I think that, I guess I'm saying, John, I'm not hearing personally a reason to reopen the policy, and I think we're bound by the policy. And, yeah, I'm sorry to say that.
I'm also, want to say, in deference to the policy committee, I don't think we've rubber stamped any policies. I think we've discussed every single policy in our new merged district for quite a long time. So I just wanted to state that up front, and I thank the policy committee.
Yeah, and I also think that if we open up the policy, there's gonna be a temptation for certain families, for financial and childcare reasons, to wanna push their kids into full-day kindergarten because, and I think there's better ways to address that problem, that we need to address that problem, but I can see, families that are struggling to afford to pay daycare, who, have pre-K schools a half day, with a kid with an October birthday, saying, boy, if we could push them to kindergarten earlier, it would be a lot.
Yeah, pre-K
Lot
is a
easier
huge
for a
issue.
family situation, huh?
Yeah, I mean, the pre-K situation is a huge issue.
Yeah.
And it would, these are two very different issues.
Yeah, and if they, what they need to say is their kid is socially and emotionally ready, they'll convince themselves that that's the case.
I don't think I won anyone over today.
Sorry, John.
Thank you.
But thank you, John. No, it's an important issue, and we haven't had that discussion. We've had that policy on the books for a while, so.
And Tina, I would never suggest that you abandoned your duties.
Thank you, John.
I was just figuring that was probably fairly low on the priority list in the policy
Yeah.
review, because it was gonna be a needs and All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Okay. So, Sam, are you ready to move on to the FE position?
Sure. And Matt.
And Matt.
Matt can come to the hot seat too.
And before I start, can I ask Matt, would you be willing to sit for the after school discussions? It might be, you don't have to, but it might be helpful to have another board member, just in case you want, discussions or you want input from yours. We'll follow that up.
Can I ask a process question on this before we get into it?
Yes.
Why isn't this just part of the budget? I mean, why
You know, I was talking to Jim earlier today.
Yes.
The budget season is one that I think I've learned a lot from, being my first run through. This year, I went with a process that was already in place. And it was a good process, don't get me wrong, I think we could do a good budget. One thing I'm learning as the school year goes on, is we learn as the school year goes on. And particularly when you're new to a place, right, I'm learning needs. And principals are seeing needs, as they're getting to know new classes of kids more, and better.
So we want this for this fall.
So I'll leave that
I
to,
was just trying to understand why we have a budget request completely separate.
yeah, that's
Budget
why.
process.
Yeah, a few.
And we are gonna address that a little bit
Yes.
too.
So could we have the people sitting at the table introduce themselves
Yes.
for the
Yeah.
people at home?
Yes. Sure.
So I'm Pam Arnold, and I'm the principal at the middle school.
My name is Matthew Roy. I'm the assistant principal at Main Street Middle School.
So the first thing we wanted to do was apologize for not being on the agenda. And thank you for letting us share our proposal with you. And as Libby said, we had this conversation around budget time. And, Matt and I will both acknowledge that this is something we feel is critical, but we also thought, well, maybe in a year, trying to be as fiscally responsible as we could at budget season, we really felt like, okay, so maybe in another year, we'll put the proposal forward. And I don't know if you've had a chance to read it, if it would be helpful for you to take a couple of minutes to read it before we start talking.
We got it right before the meeting
I
started.
think, that's right, I think it might be helpful.
Yeah,
So
it takes a
give
couple
you
minutes.
a couple
to
minutes.
just- Yeah. Maybe we can play music for the folks.
Okay, so thanks. So again, our apologies, but there was a reason why we asked Libby if it would be okay for us to come tonight. There were a couple, in this item that you're on right now, there are some conversations you're gonna have with Mike McCraith, and it felt more appropriate for us to come and share our proposal in this same time rather than have another meeting where you're again getting a request for something potentially as an increase. So it just seemed to align well. So that's where our apology is that you didn't get a chance to read this ahead of time. When Sarah left, I said to her, I said, so Sarah, we did not know Sarah was coming, and Sarah did not know we were coming. However, a lot of what she shared with her concerns aligns directly with what our proposal is for you tonight. We are in our second year of restorative practices, and it's a multi-year process to implement those particular practices. You can't flip a light switch and have them all in place. And so we are doing a lot of work around that area. And a lot of the language that you see in this proposal, the fact that we are calling our support team a resiliency team, those are the kinds of skills we're trying to build with kids. And what we're recognizing is that there are a lot of kids, every child has unique needs and diverse learning styles. There are some kiddos who need more support than others, and they need different types of supports. And you saw in there a little bit how that looks right now. We, I would say, are more in reactive mode in dealing with student behavior rather than proactive, which fits with the mantra of restorative practices and the beliefs and the philosophy behind that. We're limited right now in spaces. Not that we need any additions, although I didn't know what Sarah was going to share about the facilities. And she's identified some areas that we all know already, and there are some plans with the facilities for that. We've had a lot of conversations about shifting things around in our building, and we are able to maximize space more efficiently than is currently happening right now. So we have identified a space where we would like to create a center for kids to be able to come, any student who has a need. And Matt will talk a little more specifically about what some of those focus areas should be and that we want to be, but it's really a space for all kids. And the other part that we're really focusing on is building the systems within our school at the different tiers. Tier 1 is for all kids, Tier 2 is for a smaller percentage, maybe 10% of our kids, and then Tier 3 are those who have maybe more significant needs that we need to meet. We absolutely need to build more supports for kids. And we want them to be able to access what they need in the moments that they need it so they can then learn in the classroom. And right now, it's a little bit of shifting around. It's who's available to help in an immediate situation. And we're excited about being able to develop some core standards around social and emotional learning with the new coordinator of that particular position for the district. So there's a lot of systematic, and I think Sarah used the word systems, conversation happening at the middle school. The teachers are asking for our help, and we want to give them our help. However, we are being pulled to address the immediate needs for students and not having the time to get into the classroom to help teachers develop strategies to reach those kids in the learning environment. So there are a lot of pieces to this. We tried to condense it for you. But overall, we will be creating the Resiliency Center regardless of what comes out of this conversation, and then we'll be proposing in a year from now. We're hopeful that we'll be able to articulate that it is a big need at the middle school. Years past, there was a planning room. Planning room is not the concept that we're looking for. We're looking for a place where kids can take the break that they may need to get the support that they may need for shorter periods of time so they can return to the classroom. And also that teachers have been doing a great job at trying to monitor and address some of the emotional regulation challenges that are happening in the classroom. And by the time that has extended in the room, all students are impacted. And so we're trying to support them all in different ways based on what their needs are. So that's kind of the broad picture. Matt's going to share a little bit about what some of the specifics are, and then quite sure you'll have questions, because I saw Tina already raising her hand over there, so.
I didn't even raise my hand, I just made a face.
No, it went like that, that finger went up, I saw it. So Matt's gonna share some specific examples.
So thank you for the opportunity to speak with you about this. You know, one of the things that's really impacted my, sort of my push and my desire to have this position added, as Pam mentioned, we've talked about, fiscal year 21, so a school year in between where this would come up. There's a few success stories that I'd like to share about things that have come up in situations with students that our ability is sort of maxed out right now, and I would say we're probably overextending ourselves as a resiliency team, and with our administrative assistants included, with what we're able to do for students. And those have resulted in some success stories, and I think that we have a number of students with the opportunity to take sensory breaks, movement breaks, and sometimes behavior plans, incentive-based reward time or breaks that are earned. Those things have led to some success with students. I think we have a lot of students who would benefit from similar types of plans and opportunities. However, right now within our systems, within our staffing level, within what we have right now, it's not really possible to offer those opportunities to more kids. As Pam mentioned, a lot of what happens right now is a reactive response to misbehavior. Or in some cases, I think a lot of it's not misbehavior. It's kids are coming into the building with any number of needs. Some kids are entering the classroom with needs that revolve around their attention and ability to focus. Some kids are coming in with anxiety that impacts their ability to remain calm or to sit quietly in a classroom. And we want those opportunities for students so that a teacher knows there's a place for a student to go proactively, where if they start to see those signs of student behavior coming up, they can say, hey, I think this would be a great opportunity for a break, a movement break, a sensory break. The student can access that space, kind of hit the reset button and be able to go back to class and really access their learning without also disrupting other students. I think our teachers are doing a great job of understanding that there's not really a space for kids to go. Really trying to keep kids in the classroom, which is obviously our number one goal as well. Is we want kids in the classroom. That's where the learning happens. And so, in some cases, students are finding themselves sort of progressing through some, a warning or a redirect, and then move your seat, and a student may be spoken to several times before finally it's reached a level where the teacher's like, there's no real other option right now besides sending you to the office. At times, that student may end up waiting because myself or Pam might be in a meeting, we might be with other students already processing through some things, phone calls with parents and various types of things where a student could end up missing significant time. At times that puts a real burden on the office staff. It never feels good to have a student in the office having for lack of a better term, having some kind of breakdown where they're emotional, they're upset, and they're kind of in a public setting. It disrupts, it doesn't feel good on a confidential level for that student. I think it kind of disrupts the business of the office and visitors coming in and seeing some students waiting to get support or waiting to come in most cases, waiting to come into my office so that they can either process through behavior, or in some cases, they just need a place to be where they can kind of reset. They can talk through maybe things that are making them anxious, things that are stressing them out, some of the things that they're bringing with them from home, or just talking about what do we need to do when we go back to class so that we can be successful, and not disrupt other students' learning. Sure.
So I asked him if I could chime in for a second. So when we're looking at the whole restorative practices philosophy, a lot of times these students who are being sent out because it's gotten to that level, they're coming in with a feeling like they're in trouble, but they're really not in trouble. Restorative practices is about giving them that opportunity to have that conversation, to work through whatever it is that they need, and then return to their learning environment. So right now it's a bit disruptive for the students who are getting sent out, as well as the places they end up, which is the main office and not the best location, which is why the separate space will make a difference with that as well. But I think it's also that movement towards, we want kids to recognize that they have a need. What's the best way for them to address it or to work through it, and having that support, the support folks there to do that. I lost my train of thought, but it'll come back to me. There's something about, it'll come back to me.
So I brought something that I just want to show, and I brought it.
We talked about this very strategically, and it's not for.
I brought this for the purpose of being able to have the opportunity to talk about what this pile represents.
Yeah.
And so what you're looking at.
Let's share what it doesn't represent.
Yeah, so these are office referrals and detention slips. And what.
That's a big pile, Matt.
Yes,
it is.
but let us talk through it though.
Over what time period?
This is this entire school year. And so, to me, what this represents is not, or to us, this is not of, you know, oh my gosh, there's an immense amount of inappropriate behavior, or there's horrible behavior of bad kids. If you were to read through a lot of these, or most of them, a large percentage would have the words distracting, disrupting. A lot of these are connected with kids that are having a tough time in the class. And it's not necessarily, these don't represent consequences. They represent, this is information for the office to have to talk with students about what's been going on. To me, it represents an immense amount of time for students out of class, where for some of these students may have had to wait a half hour to just talk about really what are, I would say, like some quick fixes, or where a student may just, for whatever reason, been disruptive, needs to get something off their chest, needs to move around, needs to burn some energy, needs to kind of go through some grounding techniques, you know, some sensory techniques or anxiety reducing type of strategies. And in a large case, what I would say this pile represents is missed opportunities for students. And I think that within that.
And a missing system to help support them.
Yeah.
That's the piece that we're really trying to articulate.
That's the most important piece, and kind of tying it in with restorative practices. You know, 80% of what we do within the restorative practices, we want to be proactive. And so we want teachers to be able to identify students that, you know, they're looking antsy, they're struggling, they're starting to get a little disruptive, and be able to take that break and access that sensory space at the resiliency center, so that they can be more successful. It would also give us the ability to schedule breaks in. Sometimes students, particularly, you know, 5th, 6th grade, have a difficult time identifying themselves. I need a break right now. Some have that skill, but it would, you know, having a space and a person for that would allow us to schedule those in, so a student wouldn't have to request those breaks or figure out on their own when they need them, but just have that ability to, when we know there's a student that needs them.
And a lot of what we see in that pile is developmentally appropriate and learning. However, they need specific strategies and techniques that they can access themselves to help them grow through some of these challenges and situations that get them into a place where they're not in the classroom. So it's not an atypical type of, it's not atypical behaviors, but for some kids, the length of time and their inability to find those strategies is a piece that we feel like we're not providing for them at the moment.
And things like bullying or like physical violence, substance type stuff, that would be presented to me on a different form. This is really classroom teachers communicating that a student's having a difficult time in class. The last thing that I'll mention, that I'll talk about as far as what this pile represents is a lot of time that students could be in class that are not, a lot of time where students may be able to, a quick break or some scheduled breaks and time in the resiliency center would prevent a lot of these things from happening. And it's a ton of time spent by myself, Mrs. Arnold, and at times our school counselor or social worker, wherein particularly I think that the time would be better spent with working with teachers on teaching practices that also help prevent some of these types of things from happening, where kids are more engaged, where students are, where there's more access to learning that's built into the teaching practice. So those are the
Great.
So that's our insight.
Steve?
I want to first, I really have a few really little questions for you, but I was hoping maybe, Libby, do you want to add any context to this before we jump into questions, just because?
My only context that I would add is that I think it's an obvious need of more behavioral help at the middle school. There's a significant amount at the, well, I think there's a little need at the elementary school too, but there's a significant wraparound team at the elementary school, and there's even more of a wraparound team here at the high school, and there's these two and a social worker at the middle school. And so I want Pam to be doing something else. I want Matt to be leading that process as terms of this is the system he's building, and not the main person all the time. So yes, I see a definitive need.
I want to kind of ask you some questions that are critical of all of us as we do this, but I wanted that pile, what else it might represent. We just finished a really great little training presentation on equity issues, and you guys have probably already gone through that as a team and really started. You guys are probably all on the same team as we're just getting onto the team.
We're getting in the arena.
Yeah, we're going to get bloody too, right? So I'm wondering if that also represents our district's failure to really do this well in Tier 1, or really meet the needs of all of our kids in that classroom before this ever happens. I wonder if this pile represents the scale of our leaving kids on the margins when we don't want to be, or, I see in your preamble here, there's a piece about that these are scheduled into student plans, and I'm wondering how much of that, I'm going to ask you I'll ask you 3 in a row and then I'll be quiet. How much of that represents kids who are on plans versus kids who are not on plans? That would be the first thing. The second thing is how much of that represents boys? And then I would, I would ask you, I really liked what you said at the end there, Matt, about that it gives you time to get in there and prevent this. But I guess my concern is that's really where it's all at, right? Is where we really want to be doing is best first practice, best first instruction, and to not structure our schools in a way that starts dividing kids into ones that can sit in that chair well for 6 hours and those who cannot sit in that chair. And so I just want you to kind of wrap all that up a little bit for me, and I won't ask any more questions.
I'm going to speak to the Tier 1 question,
Yeah.
and then Matt can speak to the specifics. So that's exactly what we are trying to identify as well in our proposal, is that Tier 1, our teachers, they've been working some with Universal Design for Learning strategies and practices, which is providing information in different mediums and different ways to try and hit the diverse learning styles of all kids. They need a lot more practice and a lot more time with that. We need more time in helping to model that and to provide feedback to them in the classroom. So our focus right now has been Tier 1, which is all kids and all teachers. So what that pile represents, I don't know that Matt will be able to answer some of those specifically, but he can take a shot at it.
Yeah.
I'm hesitant to give a definitive answer about the 2 questions.
I don't know that we've analyzed it that way.
I'd be
Yeah,
happy
to go through
to get back to the board. I'd be happy to get back to the board with those specifics. I think that I would agree. I think that in a large part, I think Tier 1 practices can go a long way to preventing a lot of kids from being sent out of the classroom and getting them more engaged. I also think that there are always going to be kids, whether they're on an EST 504 IEP, I think there's always going to be kids that on one day or another are just going to need a space to go, whether that's somewhere safe to go to work quietly, to get away from the classroom environment because for whatever reason that day they're really easily agitated, or if they're coming in, it was a really awful night at home and they're anxious about things and unable to focus, and that's presenting itself in disruptive or distracting behavior. I think those situations are always going to exist, but I think what we'd love to do is have more time to work with teachers on those Tier 1 practices that aren't just academic, but also what are we doing as a school in Tier 1 for social and emotional learning.
And there are different strategies for different genders that work.
And I would by no means be suggesting that I'm not included. Like I I really.
We could wager
I
some
agree
guesses,
with-
but we're
That's
not
okay.
going to do that.
I agree with Libby. I mean, this is by no means a proposal to be like, I'm no longer, working with kids on their behavior. I think that this is more, there are large parts of my day at times spent with students talking about behaviors that I think could be prevented. And at times that seems like an inefficient use of my time. And real quickly, I know that there's a couple questions. I know that there's a lot of time here too. With a few students that I've been able to provide some breaks for, both scheduled as well as earned, it's mainly taking place in the second half of the school year. I think one has probably recently had the best streak of school that students had for their entire time that they've been with us. I think other students, we're seeing academic and behavioral success. They're interacting, and they're just, I think, really, in some cases, for the first time experiencing success at school. I wish we had that
consistency.
opportunity to offer to other kids.
Yeah. I
Michelle,
think,
I
sorry.
have a question after that.
Becky was.
Becky,
Can't
first
see me
or
down here.
I saw
Okay,
you.
okay, Becky, and then.
So I have a couple of questions that maybe just need a quick answer. But first, what is this person going to be a social worker? Is this person going to be a psychologist? Who are you looking for with this?
So, we've talked about it being under the umbrella of an instructional assistant position, but it
So it
definitely.
is a true facilitator. You don't see this person doing counseling or anything?
No, because by having this particular, we would certainly be looking for a person with those skills to be able to build the rapport with kids and to be able to have that consistency. But with this, it allows our social worker and our school counselor to be freed up to be able to be accessible to more kids, because currently they, along with Matt, are doing the scheduled breaks for kids throughout the day, every day. So this person, we're a team, we would be a team, so
Mhm.
those kids who are in that space who need additional services, that's where we would wrap in our counselors and the other people with the expertise that student might need. But we did not talk about it as being a licensed individual.
Well, then I'm wondering at the urgency of it. And second, the data is incontrovertible that the exact same behavior of a white girl will throw a black boy into detention. And I'm worried about the subjectivity of what is identified as disruptive behavior and what is identified as behavior that needs to be removed from the classroom, because as much as we couch it in terms of we're doing the student a big favor by doing this, by putting them aside and letting them get their hands out of their pants, it is still and will be recognized as this kid is disruptive. This kid no longer belongs in the classroom. We are removing this kid because the rest of you need to be protected from a student who has had a bad night at home and maybe needs to be with his classmates. And so I would actually feel a lot better about this if you were bringing in a social worker, a licensed clinician of some kind, if you were bringing in someone that could actually move that child into a better place rather than babysit them. I don't think we need any, and I know you're dying to interrupt me, just dying to. But I think if we bring people into the school system to address the problems of students that are not otherwise fitting into the classroom by somebody's cloud-based definition of not fitting into the classroom, we need to demonstrate how it is we're turning that around in a professional manner. And I don't even know about that data in there. How many of those kids are on free lunch program? That's another issue that has to be addressed with behavioral issues and how it's perceived by the teacher.
So I appreciate you pointing that out, and so what we've shared mostly today is tier 1. We do have tier 2 and tier 3 where we know those students who need that specialized, that therapeutic, those conversations, those scheduled opportunities with our school counselor and our social worker. We have those individuals. I think what we're also trying to articulate is that any student, and it's not a removal from the classroom like you're not welcome there, it's we're hoping that the kids are going to recognize, that's our goal, that I think I need a little space for a few minutes. This, in our vision, is very short term, like it's 3 minutes, it's 5 minutes, and they're back in the room. Kids are doing that now, all kids will ask, but for the kids who need that very intensive support, that is at a different level, and they're identified.
And that's built into their schedules.
Yes,
and
it's built into
it's
their
all part of the
schedule.
bigger plan, I
Yes.
realize that. And you can bring a kid out of the classroom that he knows he's being disruptive for 3 to 5 to 10 minutes. The other students are going to perceive that as being disruptive, and their classmates are going to label them as the kid that needs to leave the room. And I'm just concerned, there's another part of me that thinks, well, if kids have ants in their pants, just throw them into recess. Maybe we need more playtime in the school system, even at the middle school level. Maybe I don't feel like I have enough information to feel comfortable with this whole process.
One of the other pieces that we didn't share tonight is, and I think this might address something that you're articulating, we have an SST block, which is an intervention block that's, depending on the grade, 5th and 6th grade, it's 4 days a week, and 7th and 8th grade, it's 3 days a week. And we've talked about in our conversations at the resiliency team level of, there are kids who might need intervention in a variety of areas, but their most critical one for this week or next week would be scheduling them into the gymnasium, where they're actually down getting some physical activity. And all kids could be grouped into that too. So that's a space that's already there. So if I'm someone who's struggling with reading, and my extra reading intervention is SST, and so I'm always getting that intervention, I'm always feeling like, here I'm spending all of my time working on the skill I need most, which is critically important, but there is a time where I need that physical break. So that's another system piece we're looking at. We didn't share that in our proposal.
I appreciate it, and I understand some of the concerns that you brought up. I would offer as a thought and something to consider that a lot of the students, or some of the students I should say, perhaps a lot of the students that I'm thinking about are students that would really benefit from accessing this type of space and what we're referring to as a resiliency center. I would wager that a lot of those students really feel uncomfortable in the classroom because they know their behavior is disruptive to others. They know they're impacting the people around them. I think that giving students the ability to taste some academic success is really powerful. And I think that we have students that, as opposed to I think no matter how hard I try, at this point I need you to go talk to Mr. Roy down in the office is always going to have a negative connotation for students. I think, a teacher letting a student know, like, hey, I think this is a really good time for a break, really presents itself differently to the class and to those students. And right now we have students that ask for breaks and we're not able to provide them. So there's also students that want breaks and know that they need to get some energy out and are self-aware, particularly 7th and 8th grade students. There's nowhere for them to go.
I'm just going to have to go on the record that I am opposed to this. I don't have enough information in it. I don't know how the current system is being administered. I would like to know how many of those children are on the free lunch program. I'd like to know how many were African American. I think, having had this personal experience in my family, I do not have confidence in how it will be administered. And I'll just say that. So it's my 2 cents worth.
I think Michelle, Tina, and Bridget. I think it's Michelle, Tina, Andrew, Bridget. And just quick reminder, at 8 o'clock we've got Mike. We've got after school. So.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
But in addition to what Becky has said, the pile of paper is like an interesting visual, but it just doesn't mean as much to us as would data. I don't know if that's the same 10 kids getting in trouble every week, or if that's 120 kids each getting in trouble once, if that could be turned into data, and then we could see, if we hire this person, does it get better, or what does it look like? That would really help. I hate to even say that because I understand that pile also represents that you guys having to do too many jobs at one time, and now I'm asking you to do data entry too. But I think that would be really a lot more useful to us. And I share Becky's concern about the quality of the hire. We're proposing potentially paying somebody $13 an hour. I think we did that a lot at Union in the past, just through IAs at whatever problem
Right,
we had. And
that's right. And then then we reversed all that.
Changed it to a teacher.
Right, so, I don't love that either.
Yeah.
Well, I've got two things. One is a history lesson I need at the moment. You mentioned we used to have a planning room. So, tell me that sequence. What happened to that person? I understand it's a different theory of how we're proceeding, but do we?
Sure, so enrollment dropped dramatically. I think that position, there were 2 people in the planning room at one time.
Yeah.
And then enrollment dropped, and then, I think we were at like 176 students or something like that, and then when Steve Mears retired, we changed that position. The room disappeared, so the rooms have disappeared from increasing enrollment.
Right.
And then we went to the assistant principal model instead of someone overseeing the planning room.
We have in the past had an assistant to the principal.
But not at the same time as we also had a planning room.
Okay.
So those are two different positions, and there was never 2. There was only 1 person. So there was the overseer of the planning room.
Or the.
Yes.
So my second question has to do with the implication of this, and it was a fast read, I admit, was they're on a plan. So is this a reimbursable? Is this a special ed issue?
No. It's really about all students, and not all students who have breaks or, breaks is pretty much the big one. Or sensory needs or movement needs are on IEPs, no. That is not, that's not the
That
case.
first paragraph makes.
Well, we put there's all kinds of plans, and so we put, there could be a child on an EST, a 504, IEP, or it's just a behavior need. But they don't it's not something that's attached to IEPs.
Okay, before I go away for various reasons, I'd say I don't have enough information to make this decision.
So I think what's really helpful for us is we heard the data analysis of the referrals, because we can tell you what the referrals are about. So we can do that analysis, which is fine. We wanted to come at least get your thoughts before we can, because we see it as a significant need. We do feel like we are not able to meet the needs of all of the kids in the middle school.
Can you tell me why this is May 1st? And I've not heard about this in the meeting before.
So, as I shared a little earlier, we had these conversations at budget season. And of course, budget season is in October, right? Before we get too far into the year, we've been doing, I think, an amazing job of trying to find strategies and supports that work for kids, but they're not all working. And I honestly feel like, we tried to articulate this, there's not enough people power to work with the number of needs that we have when those needs are happening.
Andrew?
I mean, what I was gonna say is very similar to what everybody else has said. It's just, I think from a process perspective, us receiving this with little information ahead of time, without the types of substantive metric that folks are asking for, I think it's problematic. I mean, the general question that came to my mind is the same one that Michelle first said, and it's the one that that Tina just brought up, which is, why haven't we been hearing about this? Why are we just hearing about this now? Why are we just getting all of this information 5 minutes before you pitch this request for this position? And maybe you're thinking, okay, this is heading into next year, and that's fine, but in terms of the quality of information and in terms of the process used here, it makes me want to definitely pause. So I think in the future, when you're coming to the board with needs, because I think everybody wants our kids to succeed, and we all want to support you in the jobs that you're doing, and we certainly want to support all of the students and families. It's just how you approach this, I think, in the future, giving a little more lead-up time would be really beneficial to the board and for you and your cause. Just
We had
my
talked
two
about that
cents.
because we had FTEs on the agenda
Mhm.
tonight, that's why I got moved up.
Yeah.
That was
So
the reason why
I don't want to
got
like berate
Yeah.
you guys, because I know you guys are working your butts off, so.
All right. But I do just want to make sure that when we leave, that we understand specifically, aside from subgroup data, I'm not sure what other data you are looking for from us. That's just the one thing, and I think subgroup data can also be, you can look at it a variety of ways. So that's the one piece I've heard, but I'm not sure what else. When you say data, it's helpful for us to hear specifically what it is you're looking for.
So first, I want to say that I'm really glad that you came to talk to us, and I think it made sense to be here tonight. We're talking about other issues that may be coming up in the budget, and I just want to thank you both for your very hard work on behalf of the kids at Main Street. I know how difficult the challenges are that you're dealing with. In terms of what I don't quite understand, I think would like to understand more, is the written proposal seems to be talking about someone who's covering scheduled breaks, which I understood to mean kids who had that built into their schedule or their plan, not a kid who in the moment and after interventions is being directed out of the classroom, which is what I think the referrals are. But maybe, so I'm getting a little bit confused between the point of the position and the scheduled breaks and how that connects to referrals down to Mr. Coy or to detention.
Yeah,
High hurdle.
I think that the, you know, an added person, gives us the ability to schedule, for more kids to have scheduled breaks that are proactive, that we know is a need that they have. It doesn't then prevent, myself, you know, the school counselor, social worker, at times even our administrative assistants, from like adding something else to their job, which we all have full-time responsibilities right now. And so that's one piece. I think the other piece is the ability for students to I would say kind of a way to look at it is to try to access this space before they are disrupting the classroom significantly or before they get themselves in trouble. In a lot of cases, you know, it's the ability to go somewhere, and sometimes they need to talk, sometimes they need to move around a little bit, sometimes there's different strategies that you know you can do with students. That sometimes it's just the ability to get away from a space and just kind of regroup. I think we can all kind of relate to that at different points. And so it's not just scheduled breaks.
Okay.
It's a lot of those needs, and it's also to have someone that can help process with a student some really low-level behaviors that might not be acceptable in a class, but aren't necessarily ones that need to rise to the office level. And part of it is certainly providing more time for instructional leaders to be in classes, to be working with teachers, to be working on those strategies that would also help engage all students in really meaningful learning. You know, at times I think there are students that just need somewhere to go with someone, and they just need some time away. And I don't look at this as a place that would be that's punitive, that it's you know, something along those lines. I think it's actually fairly common in schools to have spaces like this, and it's done really well. And so,
And we also feel like that pile is a systemic concern, not a kid concern.
Yeah.
And so that's where, you know, that data piece is, we understand that that's important, but for us, we see that as that's something that we're not doing right for kids.
yeah.
And that's the part that concerns us more than anything else.
I feel like there was a part of your question that we didn't get to.
I think you answered it, which is, so the person staffing the center
Yes.
would also be would be supervising scheduled breaks, but also interacting with kids who have
Yes.
chosen to come there, or whose teacher has
Sent
given
them
them a
there.
choice
Yeah.
or sent them there. Do you have any concerns that having a space like that will make teachers more likely to rely on it?
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Well, that's why we're not interested in it, right?
Yeah.
We're not interested in it being a planning room, which I think does have that sense, in that context, but yes, we are also worried about that, and we're worried in that we know it needs to be structured very carefully. And
So, sorry,
That's
so
okay.
what happens if this doesn't happen? Because I'm hearing a lot of concerns from the board. I think a lot of valid concerns. I think Becky raises a lot of good questions just in generally about, you know, how we choose these practices and if, you know, how much they're influenced by, you know, preconceptions we have about kids and about, you know, certain, you know, kids who fit to certain, you know, profiles, et cetera. But I'm also wondering concerned about what's happening now, and not acting because we have gotten information at the last minute and it's not perfect, and you know, everything we have, and as a result of that, leaving something in place that is keeping all these concerns that we just expressed in the present and perhaps some additional concerns as well. So that's my biggest take. I mean, you know, and I think this is a discussion we need to keep having, but I think as a board we have to think about, you know, if we push this off, what does it look like between now and the time we get back to it?
Can we get a point of clarity though? Because my understanding is Mike's coming to us about an enrichment coordinator
No, that's
position.
me.
Oh, that's you.
Mike's coming out to increase FTE because of enrollment
Oh, okay.
and class size policy.
Yeah.
Okay. Never mind then.
Maybe Olivia, the question I had whenever Pam had asked for what the board needs to see, you know, really since before our last budget cycle, you know, we get requests, we want to see more of this, we want to see more of that, people here, people there, let's fix all these things. But we've been saying, no, we want to slow down, look at the systems, figure out what's in place. It feels like right now, all of a sudden, we're hiring, but I haven't heard how it's all fitting together or what's happening, like, and I want to appease Matt and Pam, and you know, it sounds good, and let's help, and let's do what we can, but are we just putting the Band-Aid on, like we said we don't want to do, or are we actually starting to implement the systems change that we've been talking about the last year?
We're starting to implement the systems change,
So
because we
that's
know
kind of what I
more,
was hoping
we
to
know
get at.
more, and we've talked as leadership team, as Pam's nodding her head, more about exactly having the same mentality as to what these things mean.
I think, you know, we're thinking systems, you know, during public comment, Sarah, you know, mentioned restorative practices, moving that direction, moving away from detention. I think this is really critical for some of that work. I see this person, if you look in some of the responsibilities, someone that would be trained in restorative practices that would be probably expected or hopefully a member of our restorative practices committee at the school. Our restorative practices committee is working really hard to really be able to do away with detentions, not next school year, but the following school year. Some of that work is the professional development and building our capacity and building our systems, and not abandoning a current system without wanting to replace it. I think that a big part of this role could also be facilitating restorative conferences, and working with students to create plans to repair harm that's been done. And so I think that is a critical piece of this work as well, that it would create a person and space and time for those types of things to happen, so that it's not, right now our system is detention because this behavior really, you know, people are hurt and people are affected. But right now there's not the time, the space, or the ability to really go through that process the way it's meant to be within a restorative philosophy, so that we're really focused on repairing harm and building that plan to make things better, rather than the opposite, which is more of a, I would say, a little bit of an old school type of system.
Steve, and let's try to do this another
So,
5 minutes or so.
I'm gonna only speak for myself. I think what I'm feeling, and it's radiating from other board members, but I haven't checked in with them, is you have a labor shortage, and we need to solve that labor shortage. I think I think we all support a solution to that labor shortage. That's an immediate need, but it isn't it isn't the big picture that we all are starting to really discipline ourselves as a board on trying to insist on before we move forward. I think that's something Libby has kind of introduced to us, is this idea of, whoa, 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 slow down. Don't do anything without a big picture, right? Number one. Number two is we just had a presentation, and we have all, for years, we've been committed to equity in our district, and now we're starting to put some real meat on the bones on what that means. And I think we are now running everything through that filter of how is this going to work? How does this advance equity? How does that advance equity? If we're going to spend $1, how's it going to advance equity? And I think that what we need is that bigger picture context for, if we're going to solve the labor problem, is how do we solve that labor problem? And are we really, maybe we're willing to spend a lot more than this. Maybe we're willing to buy, a different type of position that would be more robust than this. I don't know, but I feel like we're missing that backstory. And I think that this green paper didn't get us there. And I think that what we need is, I want to know what the philosophy is. I'm not comfortable with that we actually have a robust and comprehensive philosophy on how we're going to change the system around discipline and support of students who are having these. We're still using a lot of the language that's been around for a very long time on these, and I don't know whether that's really the most progressive way to think about these things. And I feel like we need to be convinced, maybe, and that might be Libby's job, to kind of like lead us into a 1 or 2 sessions of, here's why we're doing it this way. Here's why we're spending the money here.
So if we have 3 proposals for additions to staffing tonight, we do have a quarterly report, but we don't have a corresponding proposal to take these from the fund balance. Usually I assume that this would come out of the fund balance, and normally we have to approve adjustments.
This position, because Grant has been in training, this position hasn't been talked about like that. The other positions have other funding sources that are not fund balance related.
Okay. But we don't know about this because
Grant hasn't been. I haven't seen Grant in literally 2 weeks.
So, I fully support having enough people in the building to look out for the kids, but I do want to know what is in that stack of paper. I want to know, is it the same 30 kids over and over? Is it the same 3 teachers over and over sending their kids out? What are we?
So do you want to write down the list, because you asked what data inputs?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't
Just because I feel like Michelle's about to start rattling some
No,
off.
that's
so-
all. I just want to better understand the problem that we're solving, and then I want to see whether we actually solve it.
Right, and I think the other piece that I had hoped to articulate is that there is a need for teachers to have more skills around working with all students. And right now, part of that missing piece of the puzzle is my ability to do that work.
Absolutely.
And so that's another piece of it.
So, and then I'm closing the
And
door.
this is quick, and that I agree with you, I don't want to kick the can down the street and leave you, but I think it came to us too quick. So I think we could right now say, put it back on the agenda at X amount of time with more data and with assurances, it's part of the plan, that this
And
really
know
is.
where the money's coming from.
Yes,
Well, that
that's
too.
pretty critical.
That too, but the issue of, is this an all-over plan that has to do with how you manage kids in the building? Am I assured it's not an instruction problem, or if it's an instruction problem, you have a plan for how to solve that instruction problem? I mean, that bigger picture was what Steve and I think Jim was saying. So I'm not saying let's forget it, let's just get more information.
And I think in general, though, I really do think in general, though, to get back, to just add to what Michelle said, though, in general, dropping new positions after the budget in this like urgent fashion when we haven't heard anything about it, that process sucks. It really does. That's my feeling.
And we want you to know
That's how I
that was
feel.
not our intent.
Yes. But it's
But-
not,
I
it's
know,
not
but
ideal.
at the same time, I think this was a tremendously important opportunity for
Yeah, I
us to
agree.
share with you, regardless that, maybe we didn't present it in the way that you would have liked. However, we could have tried to interpret and take a guess at
Yes.
what you
No,
would have
I think
liked
you
for
guys
us
were
to
great.
share.
No,
And so
I
perhaps we
appreciate
bring
it.
back more detail. But we do appreciate you hearing us And I just wanna make one
Yeah,
comment, that we're not looking to do management, we're looking to support
And
kids.
Can I put one more thing on your list when we come back? Could you explain why we have detention and why we can't get rid of it and what purpose it
Oh, no,
serves?
we're fairly certain it doesn't fit in restorative practices,
So-
we know that.
So regardless of that, why can't we just get rid of it tomorrow
Well,
if it's
we
not?
probably can, we
Okay.
still have to have a system for being able to process with kids.
Okay,
And that's missing, so,
all right,
thank you for your time.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you. We look forward to seeing you again soon.
Yeah.
Well,
Is that this year you'd like us to come back, or is
Yeah, yeah.
somebody gonna tell us?
Libby's going to tell you what she
Yeah,
wants.
but
I mean, it could be more.
So,
Michael.
Mike, thank you for your patience. And Matt, since that took longer, if you want to go, I think we're gonna actually cover
is it
that.
coming up after Mike? or-
Yeah.
It is coming up after Mike. It's totally your choice, but it's
I'd say at
getting
this
late
point I'm
and.
pot committed, so
Uh,
might as well stick around.
His stomach's been growling for a while.
Okay.
Do we have pizza left?
There should be pizza in
Yeah,
here.
I think
I think it's been handed
Oh,
over
no,
to
you're
other
not taking a
parties.
break now.
For Matt, keep it Matt.
So McCrave is here because, sorry, Mike is here.
I got it.
Because we have a significant enrollment increase at the high school in the ninth grade. So he's telling me some numbers earlier that it's a pretty significant increase, and our core subjects are busting out of our class size policy.
Says the only time this has been said in the state of Vermont in this decade.
Yes.
And this is not directly coming from eighth grade? We didn't know this was coming?
Hi. Mike, principal. Yeah, so it's pretty small, so let me just tell you. I have talked to Grant, I had the chance to do that, not that, you weren't high on my list and close to my heart, you are. But I did.
Get on with it.
I did go to see Grant first, just to see what was possible, and I talked to him about this in November. And I said, I think we're gonna be really close in English and social studies. I was nervous about English more than social studies. I said, I might need like a 0.2 FTE in English for somebody that's already part-time and expand their job a little bit, and maybe like 0.2, and I'm actually asking for 0.1 in social studies. Do you want me to put that up on the screen in the budget? Or would you just wait to see what the numbers are and come in the spring? And he recommended, I'm not trying to throw him under the bus or anything.
He's not here.
He did.
But you just did.
He's not here, probably not watching.
He did. I was at that
he's-
conversation.
He just
said
let everybody
that's-
else get in trouble.
I know.
He
Yeah.
said that, well, you could be able to blame me for stuff like for years. He suggested that's gonna be so small, just come in the spring and, you know.
And here you are.
So here I am.
Is this
So-
for the rising eighth graders or
Yeah,
the current
rising,
ninth?
rising eight, so we knew they were a big group. We knew that we were gonna be full, and we knew it was gonna be really close. And basically, we just needed to add one section of English for our ninth graders. We have a part-time English teacher who has tentatively agreed, pending your approval, to add a section to her job, and that will do it. And then social studies will be out of class size policy if we run it the way it is, unless we cut economics, and I don't wanna do that. It has 15 students in it, and I'd rather push them into one semester. We can just, have them take economics first semester, and have the teacher run a third section of social studies, global perspectives, global and international perspectives, and then the second semester she can just run those same 3 sections in the second semester. So that's why it's only 0.1. So it's not even 0.2. It's just 0.1. That's just what we need to make it work.
You're like, it's just 0.1.
It's
like
just,
nothing.
I mean, it's very small, very small. So that's what I'm looking for.
And what about the MHS data manager?
That piece, we put that on the agenda, Mike and I put that on the agenda when we got some information from a staff member that has not come true as of yet. So we're gonna cross that out for right now, and wait on that piece.
So you mentioned the 8th graders coming up,
Mhm.
and that was an unpredictable number?
No. What's unpredictable is the number of students that are gonna come from Orchard Valley.
Aha, okay.
And give them
So the
numbers we
transfer
have
is
right
in.
now.
So it's 116 students that are signed up for the social studies in 9th grade. Some of those are 10th graders because we do have global issues and perspectives is available to all 10th graders. Some 10th graders take it. So there's a little bit of a higher number there. And the 9th grader is at 102, which is, again, it could be very tight, and we could do that, or what is likely to happen, has happened the last couple of years, we get another 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 students coming in and we'll be way out of class size policy. So I think that this will do it, and then you'll see what your numbers look like again next year. But right now, this is what we need to make it.
Because these children have registered to be here next year?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
And how will this advance equity?
Well, I'm not sure. I almost just said the super honest thing. The teachers that are going to have more FTE do some of our best work with writing, and they'll be making themselves more available to those students. There'll just be more of them here. And so the class sizes will be a little bit smaller, they'll be within policy, and so students will have more access to those teachers, particularly around literacy.
Did you just say that smaller class sizes improve equity?
I was trying not to.
It's true.
You didn't set any problems up for Libby for the future at all there.
And staying within our policy.
Yes.
But, I mean, seriously, don't we have an opportunity when we add people to look at equity issues? I mean, isn't this a chance where we could say, you know what, while we're at it, let's offer some different classes, or we got a whole bunch of new students come in, oh my goodness, the scale is better than it's ever been. This is our chance to also look at what we're offering or how we're offering it.
I think that is coming, but this year, this is what we need to stay within class size policy. And then I think in the fall, and I've left a few notes for folks.
Note in the drawer.
Yeah, that there will be more opportunities to think about programming with an increased number of students. And this place is just gonna be fuller than it has been in a long time. So there's gonna be opportunities to rethink space as well.
And you don't want point 2 on
Let me
social.
ask a specific question about what ifs, this tells me the bottom line. So if I say no, can't have it.
I'm gonna close economics.
Oh. Okay, so,
What about creative writing?
yeah,
Yeah, maybe we'd have to close grade writing, there's 24 kids in it.
so it's back to the meeting the policy, that if we didn't do this, the class would be too big.
Yeah, and I would have to collapse electives or the smallest
Because
sections
these teachers
of other.
can only
yeah.
teach so many sections under their current contract. And so
Mhm.
they would have to teach more sections of the core courses and therefore eliminate the electives.
Yeah.
How many sections are they teaching, these teachers?
A full-time teacher at the high school teaches 5 sections. So
But these two teachers are not.
they're not full-time. So they're gonna be that much closer to full-time with these.
You're getting 1 to full-time and 1 to .9, or what are you doing?
One will go from 0.6 to 0.8, one will go from 0.6 to 0.7.
And both of them can do that, so it's not a big
Yes.
And you don't need .8 on the social studies?
No.
Why?
Because econ,
Yeah, I know, I didn't get your scheduling math.
yeah, so
Don't even try.
basically.
Don't bother.
You're not a high school principal.
You're like, yeah, you're like, I don't even get it. Okay.
Have you ever played Tetris?
That's totally what it is.
This, and the money
Yes.
comes from?
What's that?
The money for this comes from? Increasing enrollments.
I think there's a a lot of different places that it could come from.
What
It's
is
a very
grant
small amount of money.
Yeah.
So,
Getting emotional.
do you want to know do you really want to know the econ?
No, I think Libby told me not to try.
Okay.
She's smart.
Just speaking from experience.
She's like Steve.
And this is being
We
paid
didn't action on this
for.
tonight?
Yeah, so if
So
if we,
I-
yeah, thank you. Yes.
I move that we approve the request from the superintendent and the high school principal for these increased FTEs.
For English and social studies.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Where's the money come from?
Grant's answer, if he were here, would say the percent increase is so small, and we all know Grant, his favorite word is conservative, that he pulls it from tuition dollars or money that he has
Okay.
budgeted. He conservative budgets so much that he
He's
can
gonna
cover
say
it.
retirements.
Yeah,
It's one?
Yeah,
Retirement
just
is another place.
savings from.
From Abrams.
It's all, it's fine. I mean, if we're getting more kids in and there's always an efficiency of scale in that, so it works.
And Mike, we didn't ask you to have this information in advance, but do you have a sense of this year's exchange
What's that?
situation? The exchange or tuition?
Oh, well, exchange is just with U32.
It's not with the whole.
Region.
It's the
No,
lottery.
that's the lottery.
Winooski Valley District.
Yeah, Winooski Valley Lottery, so that's different. And this board has moved from 10 to 8 students that are accepted, and there were 57 on our wait list,
Jeez,
which is a good thing. It's nice to be wanted.
So folks.
So we're at max
Yeah.
capacity
Yeah.
on that front.
Doors closed, ancillary paths no longer skip down. Any further questions on this specific proposal as part of discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Thank you, Mike, and thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks, Mike.
Is this our biggest class?
Yes.
For the high school, yeah. I don't know if it's overall.
So I'm guessing it's the biggest class we've had in a long time in the high school. It's really a historic thing for our city that we should remember we're coming back up. Who knows how long it'll last, but we're there.
We're gonna go back.
Yeah, over 100
No,
is-
we're not.
Well, it's unclear, because
Yeah.
they're like
Plateau.
Totally.
They just haven't got to the high school still.
But, you know, we're gonna end up with over 400 in the high school pretty soon.
So before Matt brings his sleeping bag and
That's fine. Those are all very important conversations.
let's turn to enrichment and after school. I think we can probably give this as a combined, yeah, go ahead, that'd be great, as a combined update. I can start off on after school. We have 4 members of the committee here. As folks probably know, we had this board set up a committee to work with Libby to solicit requests for proposal for after-school programming. The committee consisted of Bridget, myself, Matt, Principal Ryan Harity from UES, 2 community members, Rebecca Copans and Christine Zaki, 1 MSMS student, Sam Brondike, and then she was not an official member of the committee, but we had Cassie Wilner, who works with After School Vermont, who sat in on virtually all the meetings and played a consultant role. We got 4 requests for proposal. One from the YMCA, which is a nonprofit that runs several programs throughout the state. We got 1 from Something Doing Business as Part 2.
After School Collaborative.
After School Collaborative, thank you. Doing Business as Part 2, they became Part 2, and that's what's in my mind. Which is a for-profit entity that was formed by 2 educators in Chittenden County a few years ago, and now provides after-school services, licensed after-school services at several schools, I think exclusively in Chittenden County now, although they are interested in expanding beyond Chittenden County. 1 from the rec department, which runs certain youth programs and senior programs for the city, and then 1 from Community Connections, which is the current provider of both after-school licensed programs and enrichment programs. The committee went through all the proposals. We scored them. We asked repeated questions of all the providers to get clarity on affordability, capacity, quality of programming, willingness to work with the district to meet needs, the wages and pay scales for their employees. We conducted site visits to all 4 of the providers. The rec department did not have a formal program you could go to. Libby's actually the only person who went on that site visit, but on all the other site visits, not all the committee members went, but most of them did. We had extensive discussions about what we saw on those site visits, with the exception of one provider. Those site visits entailed substantial meetings, sit-down meetings with people who ran the programs, where they were able to answer further questions. It was a long and hard process. There was a lot of quality work. I think a lot of thoughtfulness given to it, an incredible amount of thoroughness. At the end, and this was, seems like a long time ago, but I think it was less than a week ago. Last Thursday, the committee had a long meeting where we went through all the information for the final count and came to a vote. The recommendation of the committee, which was unanimous, and again, I think a very difficult decision, was that we recommended that Libby begin negotiations on a contract with After School Collaborative, Doing Businesses Part 2. The main factors going into that decision, they met the capacity needs, which has been an issue in this district. They were able to significantly expand capacity from where we are now. The people who went on the site visit were very impressed by the quality of the programming. When we looked at the complete structure for affordability, including scholarships and subsidies offered to families, it was the most affordable for virtually all income brackets, and significantly more affordable for lower income brackets. People making 70 to 100,000 would experience a small increase, but all the brackets would realize savings. They also had other perks that were not offered. For instance, on in-service days and late start days, enrolled students got covered for free. There was automatic coverage and no extra charge. They have quality summer camps, including summer camps at times of the year when other people do not have summer camps, like the last 2 weeks of August, when most summer camps close, that kind of gap between school year and the beginning of the school year. Their wages were competitive and on par with our current provider and with the other providers. And the recommendations around them were all excellent. The principals that had worked with them that we talked to had all had very positive experiences about them being accommodating, taking students a bit near, et cetera. So it was a tough decision. The decision came with a couple further recommendations. The first of which is that the cost structure, which is not as easily understandable as a sliding scale, which is what our current provider has, even though its affordability at the end of the day is more affordable, that they work with the district to make sure that the cost structure is accessible and understandable to families, so families are able to easily access it and understand it at the onset, that there's not an impression that there's a cost there that's not there. And the second is that there was a huge recognition that the current providers, the people providing daily care to our students, are doing an excellent job. And we would like the new provider to make sure that there's opportunities for our current providers to be employed with them if that's what the caregivers so choose. So that recommendation was made. Again, it was a very tough decision. It was unanimous, which I think speaks to both the thoroughness of the work But I also think it speaks to, you know, the decision. It was, people came in with very diverse views and came out with one view. So, I don't know if you want to add anything to it.
I would add that we had just two really exceptionally committed parent members, community
Yes.
members. We're always really just lucky in this town at the way the community can step up, and that added an enormous amount of value. And I also want to thank Matt Roy and Ryan Harity, who are also on the committee, and really were some steady guiding hands toward keeping us focused on the needs of the kids, keeping them front and center.
No, I concur with all that. It was excellent, and people went above and beyond. Matt?
You summarized it pretty well. I think, I think there were some people that were really swayed by the site visits. I think that played a large role in the decision. I think that the visit to part two, full disclosure, I was not on that visit. I'm somewhat familiar with part two's work, just from colleagues in Chittenden County, but the part two visit was exceptional by all accounts, and really separated them, I think, from the pack, and just all the other things they talked about. One thing that I would mention that I think factored into the decision for me a little bit, or just somewhat of a small thing, but going so far as to talk about sending, if wanted, sending representatives that work with the students to 504 meetings, to IEP meetings, to CSPs, and just the awareness and that ability to work with the school, connect with the school. And I think a big one, especially with the middle school, one of my big things going in was capacity. Wanted to increase the number of students they can access. And I think hearing the answer when specifically asked about what if a kid moves into the district and programs have already started, and the answer was we will, like, basically we're never going to turn that kid down. And so I think that's a big piece too. But it was impressive. I think the process really speaks to and the unanimous decision to go with part two is really a testament to the process, and also I think that we discovered the best provider.
So questions about the process, or do you want to introduce the enrichment position and then just take questions about
Totally up to you.
everything? Let me talk about the enrichment, because they're kind of related. It might answer some questions people have, because the enrichment piece is definitely connected.
Okay, so one of the themes that came out of this process, one of the overwhelming themes that came out of this process was the desire to keep what I refer to as enrichment programming and after-school enrichment programming at Main Street Middle School in particular, with a slight connection to the high school as well. That's very important to our community. It's very important to me. It's very important to our middle school staff, recognizing that those kind of opportunities are what adolescents need for multiple reasons, in terms of mentorship, in terms of finding a love and a hobby. And we've talked about all of those things before, and I think we talked about them in the last board meeting, so I'm not going to repeat that. But I just want to say that's an overwhelming need and desire. At the last board meeting, I presented to you the possibility of a 0.5 position to keep that piece going, and you offered up, like, where's the money, what's it look like, that kind of thing. Went back and I talked to a few people, and many people said, what if it were a 1.0? And we talked about that a bit last time as well, I believe. So taking that, I through the coordination with, quite honestly, Drew at the middle school, who helped write this job description with me, came up with the job description and what if it were, kind of a what if it were. And he had many more. I kind of condensed it in here so we could see it on the page. And then what would the contract look like, and what would the potential monetary streams look like. So this is using that, if you flip over this paper to the chart on the back, and yes, I've talked to Grant about this just before anybody asks. The district contribution already, we budgeted just over $37,000. I just rounded it down to 37. I think it's 37,285 or something like that if you really go into the exact numbers. That district contribution could pay this position's salary as it's currently being paid now. So it wouldn't, so the position that is provided to us by Community Connections is paid this salary, and that is inclusive of FICA and benefits and that kind of thing. That wouldn't be a pay cut, wouldn't be a pay increase, it'd be an even steal, and we already have that money budgeted. That's already there. If we were to look at, this does not have a sliding scale. What I did was I took what's currently there, and the $50 is the middle ground. That's not to say it couldn't be a sliding scale. It could very well be, but for ease in this situation of just getting monetary ideas, I just left the 50 in there just as the middle number. If we were to run a certain number, 10 clubs in a 7-week cycle throughout the year, and that's inclusive of the high school as well, which is a lot of clubs. And I think it's more than what we currently offer. It's about what we currently offer. Parent contribution at $50 a club would be about $37,500. That money could be would be used to pay. Oh, I'm sorry. The enrichment coordinator is 53 or 43. So you take some of that money to add on to the 37 to do the salary, stipends, and club advisors, if you will, the people that we would need to hire to teach these clubs, would be about $280 a club, since it's a 7-week, about an hour and a half after school. That works out at $25 an hour. So that's what the cost of running that amount of clubs would be. We'd still have money left over for $6,000 of scholarship money, and about $6,000 of supply money to revamp when we need it. Canoes, kayaks. Dave at the high school here was talking about getting mountain bikes that fit high school bodies, because we only have mountain bikes that fit middle school bodies. So like that kind of purchasing that is in the plans. We've talked a lot. We talked at the after school advisory committee actually about. Bridget brought up some good points of why make people pay, why have that. We went back and forth on that a bit. And I think that's still an open question. Jim made a good point of let's keep what we have going and the way it's going for a year, so we have some time to really think how we want to do that. I still have the question. The question hasn't been answered for me. My dream is to grow this, is to grow it between the middle school and the high school. And if we don't ask people to pay, then that will continue to be a local budget expense. We can't grow it as well, or as easily. We'd have to find out more creative ways to fund it. So that would be a barrier to growth, but I don't think it's a barrier we can't overcome. I'm just saying it'd be a lot harder to grow. So that's this piece. Again, I'll reiterate, this is incredibly important to our parent community and our community after this experience with after school care. The piece between licensed care, that is a big need, K through 6, I would argue, and unlicensed. This is unlicensed care. Matt, would you add anything to the enrichment?
I would add that it's important to, it's not just the parent community, it's really important for the kids. These are opportunities
Yes.
that they talk about at school. These are opportunities they look forward to all day. Sometimes these are the things that kind of like get them through the day.
Yes.
But it's the kayaking, the mountain biking, the trips to Bolton, the sledding, in Auburn Park. These are opportunities that and some kids they otherwise don't, they wouldn't have, they wouldn't get those opportunities. So I would just add that.
Yep, absolutely. So this position, as it's framed here, is cost neutral to our budget. It's not an addition to our budget. It's money already budgeted, just used in a different way.
So,
In the memo, it talked about a $50 fee per club. Is that only for after-school clubs, or is that all clubs?
That's the club that is like what we have now. So when you say all clubs, are you going with like soccer and basketball? Because that's what we talked about.
I'm going like RJA, the conversation.
Oh, no,
club action, those kind of-
Those things happen mostly, there's some after
During
school,
the day,
yeah, but
yeah.
it's during contracted hours
Right.
that those happen.
Well, club action's after school, I think.
Is it? They have, those fall under that stipend that we talked so much about last time, the
Okay.
co-curricular stipend.
This is all this question that I think.
Yeah, we have-
And I really think part of what we have to do next year is really think about these fees.
Our non-academic activities.
Yeah.
And how we charge
Yeah.
for them, data, I mean, I think data is really important, I think thinking about access is really important. But we are trying to make sure that we roll something out.
Yes.
And so this is kind of a status quo rollout with the kinds of things that are currently being paid for on the sliding scale. This budget proposes basically a status quo.
Yes.
Yeah, it kind of takes that piece and moves it in-house. I think gives us the ability next year to talk about, well, do we want to continue these services or maybe structure them differently?
And have the people in our employ
Yes.
who we can have the conversation with.
It's a really tough question.
Yeah.
Right, and what the difference is between these enrichment activities and sports.
Yep.
Co-curricular.
And,
Yep.
private enrichment activities
Yep.
and other clubs.
We have a lot of questions to unravel. And then-
Tina?
So, I understand, I think, that this is a money neutral issue compared to what we talked about, but you said, you brought it back and then said, why not full-time? So I'm asking, why full-time? In other words, you came saying not quite full-time,
Yep.
this is what the person will do. What was added
Yep.
that you
Good
think?
question. What I came to you last time with is a logistical coordinator. So I came with, like, my idea last time with the 0.5 was collect the money, put out the registrations, make sure people get paid, you know.
Find the people.
Right, because I didn't want to put that onto my already overstressed and overburdened business office, right?
Got it.
That was what I came to last time. What others made me think about was there's a lot of holes here that I know the community has brought up and the board has brought up as well in terms of all the things that we offer or don't offer, and a liaison between pieces. So a liaison between Matt McLean here at the high school and Flexible Pathways and other things that the high school is offering, as well as with Matt Link in terms of athletics and a liaison there. Somebody who can actively pursue grants and has the time and capacity to actively pursue grants to find another funding system. Somebody who can actively and willingly collect the data we need around who are we serving, when are we serving them, what's really what's getting a targeted population, what's really increasing their participation in this piece. So those are some of the things that you see here that, like, the logistics coordinator that I suggested before wouldn't necessarily do, because they wouldn't be paid to do that, right? So this position would offer up more of that piece. The connection of personalized learning plans. How can we connect it, particularly at the middle school level, to raise the level of those through enrichment and developing interests at the middle school level? Like, that would be a completely nuanced piece that not many people have that piece, you know? So this would require a different skill set.
Steve?
So I want to shift gears to the other one, to the other piece of this, which is the whatever it's called, the license. That's what we call it. So I think that I'm seeing these two components kind of moving in opposite directions a little bit, and I want to kind of differentiate them a little bit. I think that the part we were just talking about with the middle school, I think, is a really amazing thing, and I think from a public education philosophical perspective, I think it's a very positive move because what it's doing is it's in a very small way, it's expanding public education in America, right? It's actually it's having the school take a little bit more responsibility for that whole child, including the time they're outside of school, because that time matters so much to the time they're in school. And so I can't thank you all enough for moving in that direction. The license piece I have some reservations about, and I want to be very clear about my reservations, because I think the committee probably did, I was at arm's length, but it seems to have done an amazingly thorough job. But I think from a philosophical perspective, I have some problems with it. And I think that the biggest nut of that is that we're taking a function that has been, in our area, has been a public function, has been provided by a school, education, and we're privatizing it. And I think that is, we're now sending it off not just to a business, but to a for-profit business. And as maybe the only person, or maybe there's one or two other people on here who works for a purely for-profit business, and I own it, and I can speak from some authority here when I say that that's a very different animal. And it can be very, very professional and make excellent presentations and administer programs extremely well. And it finds efficiencies. And I want to be very careful if this district leaves a legacy of privatizing a public function, that new entity that we contract out to do what has been a public function does not find those efficiencies by either paying employees less or charging parents more. And those two places are where the revenue can come from most easily. And the history of private businesses is that they tend to pay employees as little as they can get away with. And I just want to be very careful about that. One of the things that I mentioned during our public hearing at the beginning of this process, and our superintendent agreed to it or nodded her head, was that livable wages would be one of the community values that we would insist happens during this process. And I want to make sure that in the contract that we have livable wages, so that we do not, because right now, the current provider, the public entity, is providing livable wages. And if we don't insist on that going forward in the new contract, then what we're doing is we're saying it's not a fundamental piece here. We're willing to allow the new entity to subsidize this program or find efficiencies in the program with wages. I just want to be very careful, is all I'm saying. I think we can do it, but I think it needs to be at a contractual level, that the pay scale be in the contract and that it be very clear about that. Otherwise, I think we cannot keep our heads up and say that, yeah, we privatized, but we're not sure if it's going to be a livable wage. They gave us assurances, but that isn't the same thing as a contract. So I want to be very careful about that. And then the other piece is the family contributions, which I saw the thing. It was very hard for me to kind of tear it apart because it felt like we had some of the cells in the boxes weren't quite lined up because they didn't really equate across exactly, and I didn't know enough to really ask the right questions about it. But it was complicated to me. I know that I think that I understand in the subsidy picture, the way that Community Connections has done it is that there are a few families on subsidy, but mostly they just kind of internally subsidize, is my understanding, or at least they combine the two sources of income. The public subsidies are very small, usually like a few dollars, but there has been some internal subsidizing too, from what I understand. And I understand that the new model would rely on the state subsidies, probably more, I'm not really sure. And if that's true, is there a bureaucratic piece to that may actually leave some families behind? They may not actually pursue those subsidies. And how bureaucratic is that? And if we're changing from what is really a very simple system right now about how you get subsidized, a sliding scale effectively, to something where families have to apply to the state for a subsidy, is there not just an information packet, but actually someone there to kind of be the facilitator to make sure that happens, so we don't lose people in that transition. So those are my concerns. I want to make sure it is equally affordable to families, and that we do not subsidize it with employees. And I'm hoping that the contract will include those two things. If it does not have some kind of provision for livable wage, I'm really opposed to it. So I hope it's in there.
Can I respond to some of that?
Yeah.
I just want to say that we had a very serious, substantial, and prolonged committee process to vet these options, to consider all of these things. All of the issues that you discussed were the subject of these meetings, which, being on that committee, was open to any member of the school board, and those meetings were open to the public. And I just want to assure the public that this is not the first time that anyone is talking about those issues, okay? That was a focused, intense discussion on a committee that had to make very difficult choices.
Great.
And again, it was open to anyone on the board to be on that committee, and it was open to the public to come to the meetings. And many of the committee's discussions with Libby around how the contract should play out focused on staffing, focused on wage issues, and focused on the issues of how transparent the fee system is for parents. So, that's been what the process has been about.
Cool. So what's the result?
And the result is that the committee unanimously recommended that the superintendent negotiate with Part 2 out of the options and provide something in the contract regarding the fees, and, I'm not sure that contract is settled yet, but.
How about the wages? Will they be in the, did you guys suggest that in the contract?
Well, the wages were in the RFP, so.
So the wages are required under the RFP to be a specific scale?
The wages were in the response to the RFP,
Yeah.
so we've seen their scale.
And those are livable?
They're on par with all the other providers.
That's low wage, childcare providers are historically low wage. What I'm wondering is, are they livable wages? They don't even have to be equal to whatever folks are getting paid now. I don't care. What I'm saying is, do they meet the standard of livable wages?
By what?
By the congressional, or the legislative, I think legislative fiscal office has done the study. I'm not sure.
They do it on a biannual
Yeah.
cycle with the joint fiscal office. They establish a livable wage.
There's objective standards in Vermont.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, I mean, this is an important point. Bridget, what I'm hearing you say is, hey, you missed your opportunity, and I don't agree, I'm on the board.
I'm not saying you both, actually the board isn't approving the contract.
I'm saying that, that's fine, and I'm saying, it doesn't mean I can't speak up as a board member.
You're welcome to speak up, but
Right,
I think.
I didn't miss my opportunity.
I think that the suggestion that, I think that the way that it's been presented, I just wanted to clarify for the public and for everyone on the board to understand that these were the issues that the committee was looking at throughout this entire process.
Right, and I want to make sure that they're now, in the end result, that they are going to be in the contract. That's all I'm asking. Are we going to have livable wages in the contract, and are we going to make sure that parents aren't subsidizing this because of the bureaucracy that's required? And I don't have any idea about the answer to either of those.
So I'll
I would love for us to look at a policy with regard to livable wage, because this keeps coming up.
Yeah.
It came up with regard to the cafeteria employees, the food service employees, and it came up again tonight with regard to the new middle school proposal. I think we all keep saying $13 is not enough, then we need to look, if we're serious about that, we need to talk about policy.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that we can just dictate it randomly when it comes before us.
So a few things on wages. The Part 2 compared to our current provider for there's two classes of the instructors. Part 2, you might have it in front of you, Part 2 paid, I think, 13 to 15 for the lower, for the counselor, versus 13 to 16 for community connections. And then for the next level of classroom instructors, they were on par at 16 to 18 for both. CC did something which Part 2 did not do, which they employ for $11 to $12 an hour. High school students and interns to provide care.
CC does.
CC does. Part 2 does not, which means that CC is employing people at a lower wage to subsidize care at the expense of people at a higher wage. So on par. So whether you consider those livable wages or not, the for-profit did not undercut the nonprofit or Washington Central. So
are those two tiers some kind of established tier kind of structures that you could go apples to apples on?
It was difficult, right, because they don't all staff in the same way, or all do the same thing, and that's what I'm saying, this was the subject of a lot of attention. It's not an apples to, you really have to sit down and try to figure out what roles these people play, how many of them there are, and they're not exactly the same for each provider, they have different models.
For the, roughly director type level, on an hourly wage, CC paid higher, I think 23 to 26. And 24. Part 2 paid lower, 19 to 21, but Part 2 structured the job more as a full-time salaried position. So I think the people in those positions were actually making more per year than people in CC. So it was higher per hour wage at CC, but it was more of a full-time job that came in kind of in the low 40s, which is roughly equivalent to kind of a starting teacher position.
I think I'm mostly concerned about the direct child care workers and how they are, because they're going to be the lowest paid people in the organization, and we want to make sure, predominantly women,
Yes,
we want to make sure that this is treated with as a government entity, we need to make sure that we're not exploiting people. And
I
that's
mean,
through a
absolutely,
contract.
and I think, clearly that was not the case, and I think if you're looking at these wages, if there's anything that stands out, it's the CC at the, $10 to $11 an hour for, high school care. It's like, how many people are they hiring at that level to provide care when they could be hiring?
What is that called, high school care? What is that called?
They call it high school intern, at least they did in the
Interns,
proposal.
okay.
Yeah.
I didn't even include it there.
And what is the difference between the two tiers the two groups are using? I don't mean relative to each other, but I mean, how are they stacking those tiers? Or is it like just a level 1, level 2 kind of thing?
They call them different things. One calls them an assistant teacher. CC calls their kind of lower wage non-high school intern an assistant teacher. Part 2 calls it a counselor. For the next up,
These are the same.
yeah, they call them head teachers and teachers. Part 2 calls them a site director. For what would be like a head teacher at.
No, assistant director.
Or an assistant, assistant
The
director,
teachers
sorry.
is assistant
Yeah,
director.
assistant director. And then there's the site director, which is the highest. For instance, YMCA, for similar positions, YMCA was a little lower actually, and they're a nonprofit. Program staff, and then assistant site director.
So the short of it is they both start the bottom of their scales for their regular folks at 13.
Yes.
Those are all the same, pretty much. Well, the Y was the
The Y
lowest.
was lower.
The Y was
The Y was the lowest.
$12.50.
The nonprofit for the one.
Yeah.
The counselors at part 2 are $13 to $15 an hour, and CC was $14 an hour.
The what?
CC was
No,
14.
the what was it called? 13, the name of the position? Counselor?
The counselors in part 2.
Okay.
People who work directly with kids.
Yeah, all 3 of them work directly with kids. So
So
the
is
ones
that,
who are,
The site director.
yeah, those-
Yeah.
so are
But they're
wages in the
charged.
contract?
Yeah.
the contract has not been.
I know, but
written
would it
signed
be?
yet.
Is it something you can put in there?
Yes, I can put whatever I
Okay,
want in the
yeah,
contract.
Okay. And then for the subsidy piece, do I have that vague understanding correct, that there's sort of, using a pay scale, it's sort of an internally subsidized partially, and that under the new system, there'll be more of a reliance on state subsidies, or is that just a butchering of the understanding of how it really works?
I would say it's a butchering. Part 2 has, for any family that qualifies for the subsidy, which is.
Anyone under right now, the way the state has it structured, it's approximately, anybody under $75,300 receives at least a 10%. That's
Subsidy.
that's the beginning.
So.
And that's from the state.
And that's from the
But that's,
state.
that based on household size, do you know?
Yes,
That
yes, it is.
So it'll
It's based on
vary a
household,
little bit.
yeah, it's not an exact science
Okay.
because it's household
Okay.
income and
So
all that kind of
as soon as the family qualifies for the subsidy, Part 2 gives them a 50% scholarship automatically. So all families who fall under that $75,000 scale get that 50% subsidy.
So
So
they-
half goes away.
And then, let me understand, so they have to go demonstrate that they've got the state subsidy, basically the concept, or, because the income verification is something probably the contractors don't want to be doing, but the state will certainly do it?
Yeah.
They help families work through the subsidy process
Right.
if
Yes,
they
and
need
we
it.
as a district can help with that too.
Yep, and then the state would contact part 2. So the money goes directly to them, and then the bill gets changed.
Yes.
So it's the subsidy, and then those families get a 50% scholarship. So as you go between the subsidy and the 50% scholarship, as you work, down lower into that subsidy, your subsidy increases, and that's where the cost comes. We did a cost comparison, especially for some of the lower income families. You might have the numbers right in front of you. It's significantly
Right.
lower.
Do you anticipate more families as a percentage will be on the state subsidies?
I anticipate more families will apply for subsidy.
Yeah.
One of my hunches, and I don't know if it's correct or not, it's a hunch, is that because of the sliding scale and because of a lack of advertisement about the subsidy, I think that people didn't, and there was.
Right.
And I think people
Yeah, it was not
confused-
transparent.
Yeah, and I think people thought that the sliding scale was the subsidy.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Nobody was informed about the other piece really, unless
Right.
it was one-on-one sometimes.
And, you know, there was an acknowledgement that, you know, there will be a layer of form filling out and bureaucracy that, you know, that will be involved in accessing that money, which is why we got instructions that, you know, we both work on the contract and the rollout with part two, that be made very easy for families, that we, you know, make sure they have the information, and that for families that need assistance walking through that process, they get that assistance. So that's easy for them, and it's not a barrier.
I think that's a really important part of the rollout. I mean,
Starting
I
May
just don't
13th.
want to underestimate that change is hard. Changes, it's going to pose challenges for everyone, and this is a piece that's going to be.
Starting May 13th, so, you know, hot off the presses, there's Jeff O'Hara, who's the guy who runs part two, will be at UES from 6 to 7. It hasn't gone out yet, 'cause it's going out tomorrow. Flyers being made now, but there will be parent info night where he's very well versed, because I met with him today, about how he needs to really stress about help and support and how we can collaborate in that.
And yeah, even though it is a for-profit, you know, the people leading it are, you know, are committed educators. And I think everyone, at least most people on the committee, have a level of discomfort with a for-profit entity. I think we share a concern, Steve, that you know, privatizing elements of our, you know, what we kind of consider the public sphere of education, I definitely have a level of discomfort around it. You know, that said, there were some concerns with the you know,
The public
the
groups.
nonprofit entities
Yeah.
that we had to choose from. That on balance made the for-profit entity favorable here. And, you know, I mean, it's a for-profit entity, but it's also, you know, a small Vermont business that is formed by educators who I think are very committed to education. I mean, their vehicle for doing it is for-profit, but you know, this is a homegrown business with people who are very connected to the Vermont community, to the Vermont education world, and have a lot of depth and experience, you know, with kids.
I think too, some of those concerns are also balanced and at times, in some cases, in our discussions, offset by the organizational structure, the organizational capacity, and sort of the ability to take it and go, and run a successful and a very, positive after-school program for students without the district or, employees or administrators of the board or whoever having to go in and fix or repair or oversee, and provide support and organization. I think that part of that was, the one thing that they're able to provide that it seemed like, from my experience in our discussions, that a lot that some of the others didn't, was just a really solid organizational structure and professional development for employees and
Culture.
The culture of the employees and within the organization was something that really stood out for the people that visited part two as, just a tight-knit group and, well-trained and just, I think there's those elements that come along with it that are some of the benefits there too, that they're able to also in some ways do things that a pure public organization might not be able to do at the same cost.
Well, hold on. You were totally happy until you said a public organization can't do that, and I disagree with that 100%. I think that that's a question of nurturing public entities rather than putting them in competition with private entities. However, I do hear that this is a major benefit of the predicament we're in right now, is that we have 1 out of 4 who actually can pull this off quickly and professionally, and that we don't have the time or resources to build the public response to this. And so, given that, certainly it's obviously a very compelling piece of it is the quality of the part two.
Steve, I would agree with that,
Yeah.
that addition.
I have a couple quick questions. First of all, thank you Bridget, Jim, Matt, everybody who was involved in this process. I know it was very time consuming, very energy intensive. Really appreciate your thought. Really important to the community. And this position, I fully support this position, and I really appreciate. I know I was frustrated a little bit ago, and because I was hearing about needs, but I felt like we didn't have enough information in the process. I really appreciated this process. I thought this was a great process. You guys, the past several weeks, have been explaining how this would fit into a much bigger picture. We understand the needs, so I really appreciate this. I'm in full support of this position, without a doubt. With regard to the subsidies, going along with Bridget's thought of, well, what if there wasn't a parent contribution, or what else could we do? I do have a little bit of a concern, because my understanding is previously this money was used in part to help subsidize some lower middle income students, and now this money is going to go fully to this enrichment. Is that not accurate?
We don't know exactly what this money went to,
Okay.
quite honestly.
Which
We
is
have
honestly
no budget.
a concern.
Okay.
You
so-
mean the revenues from the licensed program that you revenue?
No,
No.
$37.
Yeah. I thought that, my understanding, and it was clearly a misunderstanding, was that some of that was used to,
That went into a pot at Washington Central Supervisor Union, and no one, including people at WCSU, could tell us where the money went.
okay. So I'll just, I know it's late, I want to cut to this really quickly, and Steve asked many questions. Well, you answered many concerns in answering his questions that I had, and thanks for your time yesterday too, Jim. So how long is the contract likely for? Is this going to be an annual, biannual type thing? I'm just.
They would run, starting in the fall, year-round programming.
But would we enter into a contract with them for 1 year, see how it goes? Okay.
Bring that into one-year contracts and make sure that we have pieces in there, that they have, accountability measures that have to
Yeah.
be reached.
Yeah.
Which is not in our current contract
Right.
in any way, shape, or form.
Right. And that also ensures a certain level of accountability.
Yes.
In addition to those measures, just having it be
Yes.
on an annual basis like that. Would the enrichment coordinator work at all with setting up part 2? Would they work at all with?
They wouldn't be
helping-
working with them to set it up.
Yeah.
They'd be collaborating with them, certainly. One of the questions still in this enrichment coordination is if it's 7-12 or 5-12. I actually talked with Jeff about that today. Just if we opened up that opportunities, or some of the opportunities, to 5-6 as well. And Jeff's like, we'll coordinate with that, and we'll make sure kids can come in and out, and kids can do what they need to do, and sports teams, and they're well versed in middle school needing that anyway, because lots of kids are doing lots of things in middle school. So they talked about a camel's hump that kids go in and out, and they keep track of where they are, and they make sure it's available, and kids are safe and they're accounted for, and all that kind of thing. So yeah, this position, the enrichment coordination, would certainly be working with the site director at the middle school in collaboration, and making sure spaces and their offerings, because part 2 will be having those middle school kids out and about and doing things and using the facilities that we have at the middle school. And so we want to make sure that everybody has their space and that we work well together. And that's one of the benefits of bringing this position into district. We can do that. We have control over it that way.
Would you envision, one of the concerns that I heard was from Steve, and sounded like the committee had these concerns too, which was access to these assistance programs. Do you think that this position would at all help facilitate, getting folks access to this assistance, this public assistance at all, or is that totally outside?
To the subsidy?
Yeah. Or
This
the
piece
state
this piece isn't connected in that way, because the
Yeah.
subsidy only applies to licensed programs,
Right.
and this is an unlicensed program.
So that position would not help at
No.
all in that
No.
regard? Okay.
I mean,
That's
it's
helpful.
not
That
to say
program's internally subsidized effectively, right?
Right,
With the
right.
revenues from the program
Right.
would subsidize.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay, last thing, I realize it's very late. If we identify along the way, and I hope we will be looking for these things, if we identify that there is an area of need, if there's like a benefit cliff, for example, near the edge of where the subsidies are, and we have some families that are like at 200, 250%, 300% of the federal poverty level, all of a sudden, paying hundreds or more.
Part 2 will
more,
work with them.
Okay. I was also thinking that might be an area where the board could step up and fund.
We can make sure that
Okay.
families have care.
So we probably need action approving.
This part is the motion.
Yeah.
Somebody want to make that motion?
I
And then somebody
move
gets
that
a
we
quote.
hire an enrichment coordinator.
Second.
Any
As
further
described in the
discussion?
superintendent's report.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Next motion?
Adjourn, adjourn, adjourn.
Second.
Non-debatable.
That
All
was
those
the
in
right.
favor?
I don't have an agenda, so.
Well,